Hi, I'm Michael Amos Cody. This is my short story collection, A Twilight Reel. I'm going to read the opening of the fourth story in the collection, The Flutist. When Dr. Brian Anderson used up his last breath on a moderately difficult ascending passage in Gaubert's Nocturne and Allegro Scherzando and fell over dead on stage during his annual Ides of March recital, the Department of Music at Runyon State University, for the first time in 41 years, faced the task of finding a new professor of flute. The pressure was on. Because of Dr. Anderson's long-standing reputation as a teacher and an artist, RSU was a favorite destination for area flutists transitioning from high school to college. Applicants were many and acceptances restricted, and the music department, jealously guarding one of its most significant claims to prestige, wanted to move quickly so as to lose as few of these recruits as possible. In the name of decency, however, the department chair and university administration agreed that the search for Dr. Anderson's replacement would not officially begin until after his on-campus memorial service was held on the last Saturday in March. But Anderson had been dead less than 36 hours when Dr. Joanna Whitmire, chair of the Runyon State Department of Music and professor of clarinet, put her executive aide to work gathering the addresses of department chairs and graduate directors at the nation's best music schools, focusing particularly on those east of the Mississippi River and, for the most part, south of the Mason-Dixon line. Meanwhile, Dr. Whitmire created the search committee, wrote the job description, and submitted paperwork for the request to advertise. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, with the collected email addresses entered and waiting, she finished drafting and revising the communique to be sent along with the job description. All was prepared, pending the approval of Human Resources and the arrival of the Monday after the memorial service, still a dozen days away. Dr. Whitmire sat for a moment in her high-backed black office chair, looking from the computer screen to the clock on the wall. "What the hell?" she said, clicked send, and left the office for her 3:30 hair appointment at Eliza's. The harried and hurried search committee wanted a woman, having for so long had a man in the position. During the 2-week period when the search was open, a surprising 21 applications arrived. Dr. Whitmire, with her committee's email approval, disqualified 12 of these immediately. 5 had neither work completed toward a doctorate nor professional experience to be considered equivalent. 3 fell prey to nasty knife-in-the-back letters of recommendation. 3 more doctoral degrees had gone cold. Having been in hand for more than 5 years while the candidates moved almost yearly from one adjunct position to the next. 1 sent application materials apparently intended or previously used for another position at another university. With 9 viable candidates remaining in the files, 6 women and 3 men, the search committee met on a Wednesday afternoon in the middle of April to reduce the 9 to 5. Those remaining would be interviewed by telephone, after which 2 survivors would be invited to visit campus. The overheated faculty lounge became a sweat lodge as rain poured down outside the closed windows and the custodial crew buffed the hallway outside the closed door. The committee read and reread the candidates' credentials and listened to audition recordings, listened again and reread recommendation letters and teaching statements. As rain continued outside, conference calls babbled on both ends, and then arguments for or against one candidate or another roared or hissed from committee members. Finally, the new green leaves and pink petals beyond the windows darkened as the day shifted to its relative minor key, and only 2 files remained on a coffee table littered with stained styrofoam cups and half-eaten donuts. The committee escaped into the approaching night, and the head custodian propped open the lounge door and raised the windows to clear the air of the odors of sweat and stale breath. Goodbye, Main Library.
Next month, Charlotte will say goodbye to the main library through a series of commemorative events called One for the Books. Not only will we say goodbye, but we'll also look forward to the new main library that's going to be built. I love libraries. I love libraries because they're places of great discovery and finding new things. So today I want to read a passage from a book that happens to be on my bedside table, written by a local physician who many of you will know, Chuck Edwards. Chuck serves patients with memory and mobility loss. And this is a passage from near the end of his book. The quarantine and social isolation forced on us by COVID-19 compelled us to be creative in keeping our patients calm and free of agitation. It also made us aware of the composing effect it had on caregivers. We then made the leap that all of us could benefit from the quiet and escape from the noise and uneasiness of our daily lives. By being aware of the deep positive effect that the five senses can offer us, we can stake out stress-free havens that allow us to recharge and rearm. The stress-free havens may simply be taking walks, making use of our eyes and ears, and consciously avoid thinking. They may be sessions when we read to our spouses. They may involve more touching, hugging, or hand-holding, which we humans continue to need throughout our lives. The first sensation we experienced was the sense of touch. The benefits, the calming and feeling of connectedness never wane. Again, finding new things. That's why I love libraries. So goodbye, Maine. We'll look to the new one soon. It'll be with us before we know it.
Hello, I am Mark West, and I am happy to participate in this One for the Books event to remember the Maine Library. And boy, do I have a lot of memories of the Maine Library. Before the Maine Library was in its current configuration, in the days before Imaginon opened up, the children's section of the library was located in the Maine Library. And when our son was young, I took him to the children's part of the Maine Library many times when he was working on various research projects. I remember once taking him there when he was working on a project with castles. He loved castles, and I think it may be interesting that he's now an architect. So I remember taking him there, and he wanted to look up a bunch of books about castles. And the librarians there, just like the librarians today at Imaginon, were just as helpful as could be. And so in my reading, I want to read a selection from Bud, Not Buddy by Christopher Paul Curtis. In this book, the character Bud is facing a crisis in his life, and he knows he needs help. And so he decides he's going to go to the library, which is located in Flint, Michigan, to try to see a librarian. He calls her Miss Hill, so that she can perhaps help him with his problem. It starts on chapter 7, and I'll read an excerpt from that for you as my send-off to the Maine Library. I pushed the heavy door open and walked into the library. The air in the library isn't like the air anywhere else. First, it's always cooler than the air outside. It feels like you're walking into a cellar on a hot July day, even if you have to walk up a bunch of stairs to get into it. The next thing about the air in the library is that no other place smells anything like it. If you close your eyes and try to pick out what it is that you're sniffing, you're only going to get confused because all the smells have blended together and turned into a different one. As soon as I got in the library, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I got a leather on all the old books, a smell that got real strong if you picked one of them up and stuck your nose real close to it when you turned the pages. Then there was the smell of the cloth that covered the brand new books, the books that made a splitting sound when you opened them. And then I could sniff the paper, that soft, powdery, drowsy smell that comes off the pages in little puffs when you're reading something or looking at some pictures, a kind of hypnotizing smell. Well, I opened my eyes to start looking for Miss Hill. she wasn't at the lending desk. I walked between the stacks to see if Miss Hill was putting books up. 3 doggone times I walked through the library, upstairs and down, and I couldn't find her. I went back to the librarian at the lending desk, and I waited for her to look up. She smiled and said, "You could help me." I said, then I had a question. She said, "Of course, young man. How may I help you?" "Well, I'm looking for Miss Hill." The librarian looked surprised. "Miss Hill? My goodness, haven't you heard?" I answered, "No, ma'am." I got my stomach ready to hear about Miss Hill biting the dust in some way that was going to give me nightmares. The librarian said, "Oh, there's no need for you to look so stricken. It's not bad news, young man." She laughed a quiet librarian type laugh and said, "Really, it's not bad news, unless you had matrimonial plans concerning Miss Hill." I pretended I knew what she was talking about. Most of the time, if you listen to how grown-up folks ask a question, then they let you know how they want you to answer. I said, No, ma'am, I didn't plan that at all." She laughed again and said, "Good. I didn't think her new husband would appreciate the competition." Now, Miss Hill is currently living in Chicago, Illinois. I said, "Husband? Do you mean she got married, man?" The librarian said, "Oh, yes, and I must tell you, she was radiating happiness." I said, and she moved all the way to Chicago?" "That's right," she said, "but Chicago isn't that far. Here, I'll show you." And she reached under her desk and pulled out a thick leather book called The Atlas of the United States of America. She thumbed through a couple of pages and said, "Now, here we are." And she turned the book to me. It was a big map of Michigan and a couple of the states that were next to it. "Now, we are here." She pointed to the spot that said it. "And Chicago is here in Illinois." I looked pretty close, but I know how tricky maps can be. Shucks, they can put a whole world on one page of a map. So I said, well, how long would it take someone to walk that far?" She said, "Oh dear, quite a while, I'm afraid. Here, let's check the distance." She reached under the desk and pulled out a thick book called Standard Highway Mileage Guide and turned to a page that had a million numbers and city names on it. She showed me how to find Chicago on the line that was running across the page and Flint on the line that was running down the page on the other side, and then to look at the number and see what was written. And it said 270 miles. She pulled a pencil and said, "Okay, now this is how one figures the amount of time required to walk to Chicago now." And she pulled the third book. Shucks. This is one of the bad things about talking to librarians. I asked one question and already she had us digging through 3 different books. She thumbed through the book and said, "Aha, it says here that the average male human gait is 5 miles an hour. Okay, assuming that you could cover 5 miles an hour, all we have to do is divide 270 by 5." And it said, 54 hours. Much too long to be practical. No, I'm afraid you'll simply have to wait until Miss Rollins comes back to Flint for you to have a visit. And that sets into motion a whole other set of events that take place in Bud Not Buddy. Well, I know that when I've gone to the library, that same experience of looking for one book and coming back with 3 more, or maybe even more than 3, is a common experience, but it's part of the joy of being in a library. I have many joyful memories of the main library, and I know the new library will be wonderful too. But now I want to say goodbye, Maine. Thanks for everything.
Hello, I am David Radovich, and to celebrate the Charlotte Main Library, I would like to read 2 poems that deal with libraries, reading, and transformation. The first one is called On the Pillage of the Iraqi National Museum. It comes from a book called Middle East Meza, which was published in the Arab Spring. And this particular poem deals with the war in Iraq. On the Pillage of the Iraqi National Museum. How easily we wipe out heritage, whole civilizations. I can't remember what my hand touched even an hour ago, let alone what that lover, my best lover, smelled like, kissed like all those many years before. We erase so many lifelines of what is glorious without thinking. Illuminated manuscripts, elaborate bowls, combs as golden as the hair that screamed against the hordes. We all contribute our styrofoam detritus, our failed human histories. God bless the archivist, the librarian who preserves what we have forgotten, living in the dust of monuments fallen at the hands of purgers, who wash off blood in clean lavatories with every convenience, every dry lie, our clock repeating arms. So now we learn what time will resurrect. The second poem I'll read is a kind of love poem called Transfiguration. And this one appears in a new book I have coming out called Here's Plenty, which should be out next year from Chervena Barba Press. Transfiguration. What we think we were, an apple, lovers, democracy, becomes something else. Digesting peel and core, tyranny or anarchy, a tree being chopped down for a mall. My face turns old. Yours remains somehow as I pictured it, sitting by the fire at last light, reading what becomes mind and soul wrapped in a cloak. A new day, another meal, someone else's life. And now, as we await renewal, we say, goodbye, main library.
Hello, I'm Edward Ganji, and I'm the author of The Gift Best Given, which recounts the journey I embarked upon to determine the identity of the woman who placed me for adoption at the time of my birth. It's a story of adoption, search, discovery, and reunion, all against the backdrop of the glamorous ice skating spectaculars of the 1940s. I'd like to read to you from my book. The shoreline was lined with wharves and warehouses. Just before the river and the tracks parallel to it curved to the left, a long freight train moving slowly in the opposite direction passed. In minutes, the afternoon sun reflected off the surface of the Hudson River. She stared out the window, looking across the river to New Jersey and the vertical rock cliffs known as the Palisades. They were austere and gray, but fading splashes of autumn foliage remained as they cast their shadows on the water, and the sun began to sink lower in the western sky. Something made Genevieve turn to the other side of the coach. The lady seated across the aisle was looking past her to the river. Their eyes met briefly. Genevieve decided it was sadness in them, and they offered one another brief, guarded smiles. A moment of awkward silence followed, and then softly the woman offered, "I'm going home, Rochester." In her mind, Genevieve quickly retraced the map that she had studied of the train's route, then asked, "Have you been visiting family?" The lady sighed, "My daughter-in-law and my grandson. He's 2 months old. They live in Brooklyn." Then, as if not sure whether to say it, she added, "My son's in the army. He's in France, we think. He's been gone for 4 months. We've only heard from him once." She whispered the last sentence, and Genevieve immediately understood both the tiredness in the woman's eyes and the sadness. Other than the sound of the coach's metal wheels on the steel rails beneath them, it seemed the car was momentarily silent, and the lady stared past Genevieve out the window. "What about you, dear? Are you going to visit someone?" Quietly but confidently, Genevieve said, "I'm an ice skater. I'm on my way to join an ice review." Her sad eyes widening, the woman said, "My goodness, you're so young. How old are you?" 17, Genevieve responded matter-of-factly. The woman seemed to ponder the response, perhaps trying to remember being 17 herself, or thinking about her own son who was also young, a husband and a father, and a soldier not heard of for 4 months. Seemingly still in thought, she asked, "And where is this ice review you're joining?" Genevieve smiled, thinking about how her father had asked the same question. This time she didn't hesitate. "Vancouver in British Columbia." She stated this in a way that would suggest everyone might take a train across the country to join an ice show. Nodding her head as if she had just reached a conclusion, the woman said, "You must be very good at what you do, or your parents never would have let you go." A couple walking through the coach to the dining car at the front of the train had stopped so as not to interrupt their conversation. The woman looked up at them and announced, "My friend here is going to Vancouver." She then stated with certainty, "She's going to be a star." They smiled politely, nodded, and continued on. The woman turned, shaking her head, to again look out her own window. Genevieve was sure she heard her say, "British Columbia, it might as well be the other side of the world." Goodbye, Main Library.
Hi, I'm Ellen Burkett Morris, and I'll be reading from my short story collection, Lost Girls. I'm going to read the title story. When I was 18, 13-year-old Dana Lampton disappeared from the strip mall across from her family's apartment. My mind should have been on other things. Guys, college, getting past the ID checker at the door of the club, but Dana's disappearance captured my attention. We lived in the same neighborhood, and the nearness of the crime creeped me out. As a kid, even before Dana disappeared, I was on edge. I was sure I'd be the girl that was taken, always waiting for the next catastrophe, the next fight, my dad moving out, my world collapsing around me as my mother cried day after day. With me gone, those don't tell your father shopping trips wouldn't have happened. My dad wouldn't have had anyone to complain to about my mom either, her stupidity, her tackiness. Not that anyone would notice if I was gone. My parents were so busy fighting that a change of scenery would have been appealing at times. Why not abduction? The kidnapping of Patty Hearst had made the possibility seem even more real to me. Forget the fact that my family had trouble putting together enough money for a family vacation or to buy a car, much less a pile of ransom money. After Patty was taken, any middle-aged man walking down the street of my neighborhood with his hands in his pockets was cause for alarm. I almost freaked out when my new friend's hippie dad pulled up in a van as we were playing and yelled for us to get in. Images of child slavery rolled through my head. I'd be kept in a commune somewhere, forced to mix batches of granola and make homemade yogurt day and night. I even dreamed about being kidnapped. My captor bore a striking resemblance to the 1970s television character Archie Bunker. In the dream, his mother, a kindly gray-haired lady, offered me cake. I woke up in a cold sweat, convinced I had tasted the icing. As time passed, I realized that I was just too old to be kidnapped anymore. Dana had taken my place. When she came up missing, the FBI combed every inch of a nearby field. The local paper ran her picture once a week for the first year. When I saw her parents on television, arm in arm, united in their grief, I had a flash of envy. My parents had divorced 4 years before, wrapped up in their own lives. While I tried to figure out high school and how to keep my grades up, my parents requested my presence for drunken midnight weeping sessions and second marriages. I always showed up. Years went by and still there was no sign of Dana. How does somebody just vanish? In my imagination, I see her getting older, locked in at night, moving from apartment to apartment, somebody's prize, and me on the outside following my usual routine, school, dates, graduation, college, first job. Sometimes I feel like I'm living for the both of us. I stop and look around, noticing the sun on my face and my ability to hop in my car and go wherever I want. Why Dana? I could only guess it was an accident of timing. Who knows how often we cruise the aisles of the grocery store next to a sex offender or drive away from a convenience store as a robber pulls into the lot. Is it fate? Karma? There are no free rides, that's for sure. All we can do is watch our backs and hope for the best. I can't seem to forget her. Each birthday I do a quick calculation comparing her would-be age to my own. Every few years I come here and leave something for Dana. Tampons, an old set of car keys, a graduation cap. She'll be 21 this year. Tonight I'll leave this bottle of Jack Daniels. By morning it'll be gone. Goodbye, Main Library.
Hey y'all, I am young adult and middle grade author Frank Morelli, and I live here in High Point, North Carolina, and I'm really happy today to be able to present to you my latest book, which is a young adult novel called On the Way to Birdland, which is about a 16-year-old boy who is in search of his lost brother who's run away from home, and he goes on an Odyssey-like voyage up and down the East Coast in search of him. It also has a lot of inspiration from hometown hero John Coltrane, who happens to be a jazz legend who lived here in High Point, North Carolina. And my protagonist, Cordy Wheaton, uses his inspiration and the lifestyle that John Coltrane lived to help him to try to find his brother and try to bring his family back together. I want to read for you a part of the story where Cordy travels to Philadelphia, where he thinks his brother might be, and he hopefully will find him, but when he comes upon this man who he thinks is his brother, it winds up being a false alarm. Let me read to you. I whip around the corner, and there he is, slumped down on an upside-down paint bucket with the sax case splayed out before him and a long, skinny ponytail diving out from the back of an engineer's cap. I start to open my mouth, but the words crawl right back inside. My throat gets all scratchy and tight. I start fidgeting with the stretched-out collar of my t-shirt, and I think about everything that can go wrong in a moment like this, the payoff, where my whole journey either amounts to me being a hero or me having wasted my time and risked my life for nothing. I mean, Travis could turn around and not even recognize me. He could pull out a phone and call the cops on me right there on the spot. He could tell me to go straight to hell for all I know. Or he could smile. He could spin around and put me in a headlock and rough his knuckles up against my scalp, and we could buy a pair of bus tickets and be in New York by nightfall and catch our show at Birdland. And then everything can go back to normal, like the way things used to be, like the way I want them to be again. So I do the only thing that feels right in the moment, the thing that reminds me most of being in our room with the cracked ceilings and the bunk beds on Brookside Drive, the thing that reminds me most of home. I walk up behind him and grab his ponytail, like they used to do on our walks to school before Travis left me alone in High Point. I tug. Hard. And that's when he spins around. And I realize it's not Travis at all. He's just some dude I've never seen before in my life. And he's as surprised as I am when he spins around and my gaze meets the fuzzy salt and pepper beard of a man who's much closer in age to Train, the actual Train, than my brother Travis. What the hell, kid? He snipes, with the reed of his saxophone silent and dipped down a few inches from his chapped lips. Sorry, I say, as my heart flips around in my throat. The man adjusts the brim of his cap and moistens the reed between his lips. His eyebrows knife across a furrowed brow line. He shakes his head and resumes his wailing through the horn like it's a physical extension of his mood, shrieky and somewhat off-key. I reach in my bag and fish out a wrinkled dollar bill. I drop it in the man's saxophone case. His brow releases, and he winks at me before his cheeks go full, and he blows a long, sullen note that floats over South Street. Hey, I ask over his tune, you happen to know any other sax players in the area? The man's brow crinkles again, and he shakes his head in time with the somber rhythm of his song. His name's Travis, I sputter out in desperation. Please tell me you know someone named Travis. The man looks confused. Then he scowls and takes one hand off the sax to shoo me away. His other hand keeps working the brassy keys, pushing heavy, ominous bursts of sound through the mouth of the instrument until I feel my vision start to blur, and I'm right back in the damn echo chamber again. It's worth a try. Do you think he'll recognize it? Do you think it'll work? Hope is all we have left. And then, just like that, I'm right back at Independence Hall, with the street musicians' notes floating above me like storm clouds as I stand there and let the shame wash over me like a patchwork quilt. I hope you'll have a chance to pick up a copy of On the Way to Birdland at any of your favorite local independent bookstores, and I hope you have a chance to enjoy it. Have a good one.
Hi, I'm George Hovis, and I'll be reading from my novel, The Skin Artist, which is set in Charlotte and neighboring Gaston County. When he'd been very young, barely out of diapers, Wesley's mother had been diagnosed with breast cancer. He grew up seeing her scars. It was a rare glimpse, but just knowing the scars were there beneath her clothes frightened him. As a little boy, he had worried that something might happen to her, but she had reassured him that there was nothing to fear. Taking a tomato in her hand and turning it to show him a dark spot on the blossom end, she said cancer in humans was just like a little rotten spot on a tomato. And just as she sometimes did to salvage a tomato, the doctor had needed to cut out a little extra, a precaution. It was only many years later, after Wesley returned home from Gardner-Webb College, that she told him more details of the surgery, how the doctor had also, as a precaution, removed her womb. When Wesley asked if it had been a hard choice, she said no. She had never even considered taking the chance that her two boys would be left alone in the world without a mother. But he already knew this, had always known it. As a child, Wesley had understood those scars to signify motherhood. In his child brain, he had conceived gender in the simplest and most brutal terms. If you were a boy, you had to go off and fight in a war when you grew up. If you were a girl, you had to undergo the trauma of childbirth and then bear those scars. After giving the matter a lot of thought, he decided it lucky to be a boy. Goodbye, Main Library, and thank you.
Hey, my name is Shane Maynor, and I am going to read you a poem called Getting Saved from my latest book, Road Hunger. You ever just be driving and a song come on that you've heard hundreds of times before, but for some reason, at that moment on that stretch of road in that December air, watching those particular street lights draw up like silver-breasted angels to melt away in your rear view like the sweat that will not break across your knuckles on that particular night, when the day is done and even the ghosts have decided to let you be, you really hear it for the first time and you're like, dang, dang, this is such a good song. And you sing and sing until you cry and you can't tell if you're happy or sad. And finally, you realize you can be both at the same time. And that thought, that one, makes more sense than anything you've thought all day, week, month, year. In the song, it becomes an axe behind glass, and the glass is shattered. Its pieces glitter the pavement, and your wheels float over all that is broken because you are whole in your hurt, your joy, your longing, your fullness, and all that is forgiven between the yellow lines. That night, you fall into bed and hold your partner close enough to finally let the warmth call forth the sweat, for your knuckles to loosen their hold, letting go of the grip on fear so you can cup peace in your palm. You know what I'm talking about, right? The moment you hear the same song you've heard before, and suddenly it's new, and you get it. You get it. It becomes your mantra for the miles ahead, and it feels like a gift you've had all along, tucked away in a closet, only to be discovered years later at the right moment, right when you needed it. And you never would have thought it would be that song, because you don't even go out of your way to pause the radio when the Eagles come on. But it's there in the background now, like a compass, an anchor, a promise, a friend. So put me on a highway and show me a sign and take it to the limit one more time. Goodbye, Main Library.
Hi, I'm Stacey Hawks, and I'm the author of Dividing Ridge, The Unsolved Murder of Elva Brannick, an NC Literary map book. I'm going to be reading from chapter 11, and it's titled The Call. Walter Irwin heard the knocking at his office door. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It was 8 in the evening. The cold February wind could be felt cutting through the cracked bricks around the courthouse windows. Irwin sat up and took hold of his coffee mug. Come in. Sheriff, his deputy appeared with a solemn look upon his face that told of something more troubling than moonshiners. What is it, Charlie? The deputy closed the door behind him. I just got a call from the Brannicks up in Saddle Mountain. He paused. Jeff Brannick's daughter, Elva, has been missing since this morning. Irwin took a sip of his black coffee and then rose to his feet. It was moments like these that he wished he could stay indoors and out of the cold. He was a tall man, 6 feet 3 inches, with square shoulders and thick brown hair. His oval face was framed by a pair of glasses and his shirt collar that had been ironed to perfection. Reaching for his coat, Irwin looked at his deputy. Better get yours too. We may be out there a while. Who placed the call? Irwin asked, looking at Jefferson Brannick, who seemed both anxious and worried about his girl. I did, sir, Thomas Brannick answered as he sat down beside his father. All the children seemed distressed at their sister's absence, especially Tom, who had gone looking for her along with one of his other sisters only hours before Irwin's arrival. Where all did you search, Tom? Irwin asked. Tom looked at Nora and began giving a detailed list of where they had all been. Our final stop was at Mr. Sanderson's home. Nora confirmed her brother's story. We went all over, Sheriff. And what made you think to go by Mr. Sanderson's? Irwin asked, looking at the boy. Thomas looked at his sister and decided it best to answer for himself. Mr. Sanderson is good at keeping roll, and I knew that if Elva made it to school, she would be able to tell us if she saw her heading for home or if she were with someone. Just made sense is all, Tom explained. Irwin nodded and then turned to Vicey. Who was the last person to see Elva this morning? That'd be me, Sheriff. What time did she leave the residence? Irwin questioned. His deputy stood silently in the corner, observing the family members. Irwin had quickly noticed his objectivity and immediate displacement from those gathered around the family dining table. 7, her mother answered. She always leaves at 7 so she can be there by 8. She's a good girl, Sheriff, never given us any troubles. She's quiet, and she loves her books. Upon noticing that Vicey was beginning to become almost frantic with worry, Irwin stopped his questioning. He looked around at the concerned faces before him and took in a deep breath. Mr. Brannick, he said, rising to his feet, I will do everything in my power to bring Elva home to you safely. Until then, we will send out search parties. In the meantime, please contact us if you hear from your daughter. Jefferson Brannick shook Irwin's hand and thanked him for his kindness. Irwin departed the residence, feeling a weight on his soul he had not felt before. Charlie Shepard rubbed his mouth and looked at his friend and sheriff. What? Irwin asked. Charlie shook his head. Lola Anderson teaches over at the Dividing Ridge School, doesn't she? Irwin nodded. Yes. And that school is only miles from the new scenic parkway and back in the hills, Charlie continued. What are you driving at, Charlie? Irwin questioned. Just that there's a bad case of moonshining in this part of the county. She could have stumbled onto a still she wasn't supposed to, or into someone she wasn't supposed to. Erwin frowned. I hope you're wrong, Charlie. After a few minutes of silence, Charlie Shepherd nodded. Me too. Either way, Erwin thought to himself, she would have to have been in a lot of trouble, and either way, there would be no guarantee she would be coming home safe. Erwin realized at that moment that they both would have their work cut out for them if she did not turn up by morning.
Hi, my name is Sirvi Kaushik. I'm reading a piece titled The Magic Carpet. It was published on Jean on Her Travels. You can find this piece on my blog, surbywritersmind.blogspot.com. The Magic Carpet. Grandma and I hardly stepped out of home together. I have fond memories of the auto rickshaw ride to the temple every Tuesday, but we never went on a vacation together. However, I had the good fortune of spending a lot of time with her, walking around the house, gathering flowers for her from the garden, watching her cook, and listening to her wonderful stories. We loved sitting on the stone bench and catching up on each other's lives. To me, it was not just our favorite spot, but our magic carpet, which took us around the world through her stories. My grandmother was not a globetrotter. She was gifted, though, with the ability to narrate in a style that engaged all my senses and nourished my imagination. Some of the stories were based on facts, but most of them were mythological. She embellished and improvised them to help me understand their core message. With every word that escaped her mouth, my mind traveled farther into the grand palaces, dense forests, rode horses, and created magic spells. Her infectious enthusiasm spread like wildfire as she narrated each story. Stories about kings and queens, saints, gods and goddesses, described carefully, rich in detail and deep in insights about life in general, kept me spellbound. One second, my mind traveled to the snow-capped mountains in the Himalayas. The very next, it was in a scorching desert with a camel and an oasis that I have not seen to date. In every story of hers, I felt the strong presence of the characters. I could feel their pulse, sense their fears, celebrate their joys, and wallow in their sorrows. I could visualize the heavy silk costumes and ornate jewelry worn by them and taste the food they ate. In this difficult time of the pandemic, when traveling across the globe has become temporarily impossible, I often take my mind back in time to revisit these enchanting stories. With every story that I revisit, I come back refreshed, rejuvenated, recharged, and ready to tell my own stories to the world. Goodbye, Main Library.
Hello, my name is Tim Reinhart, and I'm going to be reading from my comedic second novel, Jesus' Brother James. Opening his eyes, Mike could see a large, white, intense blur emanating from a round, bright center surrounded by a dark background. He closed his eyes, pressed his eyelids together, and reopened them once again, hoping his vision would improve. It didn't. He could only see the same fuzzy whiteness. After another attempt to clear his vision, he could still see a bright haze in front of him, as though he were at the bottom of a pool looking up at the sunlight bouncing off the surface of the water. As he stared at the clearest part of the gray, a dark silhouette of a long-haired, olive-skinned man came into view and blocked part of the light as he moved in front of Mike. The figure hovered over Mike, staring silently down at him. Rakama. Mike heard floating down from the figure in a soothing manner. Jesus? Mike tried to yell, but his dry mouth muted his voice. The olive-skinned man uttered something, but Mike couldn't understand the man's words. My God, Jesus, is that you? Mike questioned, his voice fracturing from emotion. He tried to raise himself up towards the figure, but the man pulled back away from him. Please talk to me. For the love of God, are we in heaven? Rakama, the looming figure stated as he leaned back towards Mike, again hovering near him. Staring deeply at the man's feature, Mike noticed his strong Middle Eastern chin, dark brown eyes, long black hair, thick, unkempt beard, and deep, dark complexion. The man epitomized Mike's ideal image of Jesus. Tears flowed from Mike's eyes, like waterworks from St. Peter after his third denial, at the thought of meeting his Lord and Savior, and the anticipating his suffering would soon be at an end. The moment of judgment brought memories of his life, both good and bad. The charitable acts dueled with his selfish ones. Volunteering at a brown bag event to feed the poor versus sleeping with his administrative assistant. The pleasant thoughts of his wedding against the signing of his divorce papers. His first date with Alyssa versus the horrible scene of his naked brother on top of his wife. My God, I'm so sorry, Mike apologized, feeling as though he had ruined the gift of life that Jesus had offered him. Rakama, the man repeated in a language foreign to Mike, but at the same time, in a tone that Mike understood. Mike's tears stopped. The man, who Mike hoped was Jesus, put his elongated, rough palm on Mike's cheek to wipe the stream of tears. Jesus' fingers felt strong and hard. Mike shook in fear, waiting for something dramatic to happen, but nothing did. Mike, feeling pressure, attempted to pack every good deed in his thoughts and project them to Jesus. Feeling as though he was being judged, Mike hoped he could persuade Jesus to let him into heaven. Mike waited, wondering if Jesus performed some form of new patient evaluation. Mike wanted to be patient, but now he shook with anxiety, rocking back and forth to soothe himself. Will it take long to get to heaven? Mike inquired. The figure did not say anything. He simply sat and stared at Mike with a steady, stoic stare. Is this some kind of test? Mike asked, hoping it would cause some reaction. The man remained silent. Feeling unnerved, Mike started to babble. I know it might have been a sin to want to kill myself, but I didn't want to go through with it. The priest shot me. Mike waited for a reaction from Jesus, but the figure did not say anything. Mike tried to change his tone, concerned it was too negative. But I forgive him for shooting me. I forgive the priest. I forgive everyone. Rakama, the man repeated. Goodbye, main library. Thank you.
Hey y'all, this is Tomlinson. Today I'm going to be reading from my book, The Elephant in the Room, One Fat Man's Quest to Get Smaller in a Growing America. Gotta get my glasses first. Everybody in my family was an artist when it came to Southern food. The women cooked the most, but the men could swing a meal now and then too. My dad's specialty was chicken and dumplings, with the dumplings made from crumbled up soda crackers. The show of the year was the family reunion at my Uncle Ted and Aunt Estelle's house in Nahunta, Georgia. Uncle Ted worked in the pulp mills and played country blues on his guitar. Aunt Estelle, my daddy's sister, she was rough as a cob. From the time I was about 10 years old, every time we showed up at their house, she'd take one look at me and say, "You ain't lost no weight." And then she would call us into the kitchen, where we would add our dishes to heaven's buffet. Most of the time, the center of the table was a platter of fried chicken, piled so high it would topple if you pulled out the wrong leg. There'd be pork chops, turkey and dressing, beef stew, maybe venison if it was hunting season. Then the white food group: mashed potatoes, potato salad, deviled eggs, rice with brown gravy, biscuits and cornbread shining with butter. And then the vegetables: Crowder peas and Kentucky Wonder pole beans, crookneck squash and fried okra, turnip greens and salty pot liquor, sliced tomatoes picked 5 minutes ago. That paragraph is as close as I will ever come to writing porn. There was no way to get all the goodness on one plate. Anywhere my family gathered, a normal meal was 2 helpings, 3 if you hadn't tried the meatloaf. If you stopped after 1, somebody would ask if you were sick. The desserts were off to the side on a counter. Somebody would have set out dessert plates, but nobody used them. We used our regular plates. We didn't mind if our carrot cake soaked up a little chicken grease. We'd have pecan pie, banana pudding, peach cobbler, pound cake as dense and rich as peat moss. One year in the early 70s, one of our cousins who had moved to Minnesota brought home her new husband. He was Japanese. I'm pretty sure no one at that reunion had ever met a Japanese person before that moment. He showed up with a cooler of ice cream. We loved him immediately. After supper was a time of groaning and unbuckled belts. Time to sit around and sulk, Uncle Ted would say. The women would clean up and gather around the kitchen table. The men would go outside and lean on the bed of somebody's truck, smoking cigarettes or pinching off jaws of days' work tobacco. As a kid, I had a ticket to both worlds, the women and the men, and I'd hang around the fringes listening to the stories. Sometimes the hero of the outside version was the villain of the inside version. Either way, those stories always had pace, suspense, humor, and a lesson at the end. I'm the only one out of my family who makes a living telling stories. But in many ways, I'm the worst storyteller in my family. I've spent my life trying to rework their magic tricks, to take that sound and that feeling and turn it into words on a page. My family, without knowing it, created a writer. And without intending to, they also created a fat boy. Thank you so much. Goodbye, Main Library. We'll see you soon.
Hi, I'm Tracy Curtis, and I'm going to be reading from my book, Holidays, about how Christmas has taken over Thanksgiving. Really, it's completely unfair. I mean, 8 reindeer, plus Rudolph, Santa, his wife, the elves, and I don't even know how many helpers. To say nothing of Frosty the Grinch, Jack Frost, Scrooge, the Little Drummer Boy, and Jimmy Stewart. Who does Thanksgiving have in their court? A turkey? A rock in Plymouth, wherever that is. No tree or ornament, carol or gift in its honor. And you're stuck in the kitchen all day. Emphasis on day. Christmas gets 12 days to Thanksgiving's 1. And the colors are better, red and green, silver and gold. Thanksgiving is what? Brown, some orange. And what really chaps me is that you have the classic Thanksgiving dinner, which the Christmas people totally rip off and serve on Christmas Day. Would it have killed them to make it a steak? They have to take the Thanksgiving signature entree too? It's just not a fair fight. Goodbye, Maine. We love you. We'll see you in 2024.
Hello, my name is Valerie Niemann. I'm the author of To the Bones, which I'm going to read from chapter 3 today. Lorana opened the door to the sweepstakes parlor to check the skies. Clouds were building out of the north, and she didn't like the look of them, heavy with snow off the Great Lakes. Then she saw the man. He was coming down the road from the fish camp, obviously drunk, and with her luck, he'd become her problem. She wished she could lock the door and leave, but that would be the end of a job where she was hanging on by her toenails, as it was. She fingered the pepper spray in the pocket of her smock, hoping he would just keep weaving his way toward town. No such luck. He might have been unsteady, but his path brought him right to her door. He pulled it open and stood there on the stoop. She should have followed her gut. First, that coat didn't fit him at all right. Then the blood. My God, his head and neck all black with it on one side. Finally, the smell that wafted on the cold breeze, making her gag despite her best efforts. "You best be going right back out," she said, trying not to breathe. "Please, help me." The man stood with his oversized boots wide apart. Glasses, probably broken from a face plant on some roadhouse floor, were cocked sideways on his nose. "I was attacked, robbed. I need help." He moved inside, the door shutting behind him. She backed up, balancing the pepper spray on her left palm. Robbed? Where'd he come from with nothing down that way but the closed-up remains of the fish camp? He didn't sound drunk or crazy, though how could you tell? But the smell, robbed or not, how'd he come to smell like a deer lying dead on the side of the road for 3 summer days? "You let me see your driver's license. Sweepstakes rules." That should send him on his way. I don't have it." "Tell you what, I'll give you something to drink and you keep moving. You got to have a license to use these machines." Just Lorena's luck that not a soul was inside. Maybe it was time to call the owner. He rubbed his disgusting hands up and down his stubbly face. "I know I stink. You've got no idea where I've been. I was thrown down a hole, left for dead. Please, just call the police for me." She laughed harshly and handed him a bottle of water. "You don't call the police hereabouts? Ever?" Something seemed to click when she said that. His eyes got distant, then wary. "I'm from the government, and you're here to help us," she finished. She would have laughed again, but he looked so stricken. "I'm an auditor, federal auditor. I go through accounts, make sure things are right, money doesn't get wasted. I know what an auditor is." He leaned against the machine closest to the door, its screen strobing and flashing with the lure of quick riches, but he didn't sit down. "I was driving home. I stopped at a gas station off the interstate. The C-Mart, one of those places where things happened, where people from out of town sometimes stumbled over the realities of Redbird, West Virginia. I don't know. I needed gas. There was a clerk, a deputy. He squinted as though trying to see something. And someone else. I can't remember. When I walked out, that's all I remember until I woke up in a cave. We don't have caves hereabouts. It was underground. Probably a mine crack. Got those all over. Take out the coal and whoomp. She demonstrated, dropping her hand from high in the air to show what happened when the longbow chewed the insides out of a mountain. He got a desperate look on his face, making her think again about that pepper spray. There were bodies down there, ma'am. You have to believe me. I woke up with bodies, rotting bodies, and skulls. I crawled through them. Lorena felt her chest tighten and made sure to keep that control she'd cultivated this many months. Don't let on. I wasn't the first person that went down that hole. The man chuckled grimly. But I guess I might be the first to rise from it. Thank you, and goodbye, Main Library.
Hi, my name is Vidya Mullick, and today I'm going to be reading from an essay from the book Chicken Soup for the Soul. This is an essay of mine that was published in this book called The Joy of Less. and the essay's title, River Flows in You. I looked around the tiny quaint chapel. It seemed like the perfect venue for the music school spring recital. The high ceiling with the beautiful glass painting, the gigantic columns that arched gracefully, the dim lights, the magnificent altar, and the grand piano that stood on the platform in front of the altar all added a touch of surreal ambience to the recital. It was as if the music to be played by the students was to be an offering to the gods. I brimmed with excitement that was laced with a touch of pride, and yet, as a mother only could, experienced the butterflies that flitted in my daughter's tummy. She was to perform an exquisite composition called River Flows in You on the piano. How I loved that melodious piece. I eagerly looked forward to her performance. I quickly updated the status on my iPhone at a church, waiting for my talented kid to perform. Switched it on to the vibrate mode and looked through its camera to make sure we could get a good angle and a clear view. After all, I would have to post a video of the performance on Facebook for my family and friends. I was glad we had arrived a few minutes early. At least we had the time to choose our seats and soak in the serene atmosphere. I voiced my opinion on the excellent location to my husband. He mumbled in agreement while he keenly looked into his phone to check the latest scores of the Augusta National Tournament. He was a little miffed that I had chosen to leave home just as Tiger Woods was teeing off. If only he paid as much attention to me as he did to Tiger Woods' swing. "A birdie," he reported. I shook my head. Some things never change. I went back to looking at my phone and checked the time. I had 2 more minutes until the recital, so I clicked on the Facebook icon. 15 notifications and 7 updates already? My status update had already received 12 likes and 3 comments from around the world. Ooh, I felt loved and popular. I proceeded to the home page to check the news feed. The first feed was a friend who had changed her profile picture. I was amazed. Wow, did she look hot? How could a mom of 3 young kids possibly find the time and energy to work out and stay in shape? I felt lousy about myself. The self-pity was quickly overcome with hope when I saw the next feed. Guess Facebook was reading my mind. Another friend had shared a blog post, how to get rid of stubborn belly fat in 10 days. I would definitely have to read that when I got home. Next post, 215 pictures of a friend vacationing in Bali. I was awestruck. Another vacation? The crystal blue waters and sandy beaches looked mesmerizing, but I didn't have time to look through the entire album. Honestly, I was a little envious too. It was baffling that she could vacation in an exotic locale so often. The next update was a post on a terror attack accompanied by photographs of orphan children. How could people hate and kill in the name of God? I felt utter disgust for the perpetrators of terror and violence. Next was a post on a plane crash in the Alps. The article stated that it was a deliberate attempt by the co-pilot. Sadness for the innocent victim of these incidents filled my heart. My husband nudged me gently to let me know the show had begun. I switched back to the video mode to record my daughter and quickly realized that I was no longer brimming with excitement. Too many emotions had made their way through my mind and heart in a matter of seconds. I mechanically turned on the red button and watched through the lens, all the time making sure I was getting the best angle. It didn't seem too clear. Maybe zooming in would help. I was still adjusting the zoom feature when the phone informed me that the storage capacity was exhausted. I was exasperated. I glanced at my husband and saw that he had put away his phone to listen intently with his eyes closed. Rather than prod him to start recording, I chose to put away my phone too. And that's when I experienced it. A soul stirring, similar to what I had felt when I heard church bells ring. Up until now, I had watched the performance from behind the lens for the benefit of my Facebook audience, and it had diluted the experience. It was only when I put the phone away that I engaged my senses fully in the experience. Only then did I notice my daughter's deft fingers flawlessly caress the piano. Only then did I pay attention to her intense expression, a reflection of her focus on the beautiful composition. And only then did I experience the joy she felt as the melody flowed from her heart to reverberate all through the chapel. It was a memorable experience that captured my heart and that was captured by my heart and not by a gadget. How apt that she had chosen to play River Flows in You, because that day it truly did. Thank you, and goodbye, Main Library.
Hi, I'm Heather Bell Adams, and I will be reading from my second novel, The Good Luck Stone. This is about a Savannah society woman who's 90 years old, and she disappears suddenly when a secret she has kept since World War II begins to unravel. So I'll read just a brief excerpt from the first chapter. Wearing the brooch was a risk, but surely no one would recognize it. Audrey Thorpe lingered by the wall in the lobby of Savannah's Jepson Center for the Arts. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne and bite-sized crab cakes, while the museum's donors mingled and congratulated themselves on another fine exhibition. Audrey leaned against a linen-skirted table for support and returned a friend's wave across the crowd. At her age, the room's pale stone floor was almost as treacherous as an ice rink. She'd gone her entire life, 90 years, without a broken bone. Now her sense of balance worsened with each passing day. At home, she resorted to using a cane when she felt unsteady, but she didn't like to be seen with it on social occasions. The last of the evening sun filtered in through the glass facade overlooking Telfair Square. Trying to quell her impatience, she touched the brooch pinned to her dress. The cloudy green stone, flawless jade, still as smooth as when she'd first held it so long ago, had been carved to resemble a hibiscus bloom. A tiny seed pearl glimmered from its center. As soon as her granddaughter approached, Audrey dropped her hand, which had begun to tremble. She didn't want Deanna to notice the brooch. This particular jewel hadn't seen the light of day since the war. Deanna, a 38-year-old woman who monogrammed practically everything she touched, straightened the name tag pinned to her navy sheath. It had been printed with Deanna Gayton, but she'd added Thorpe with a hyphen in blue ink. Obsessed with social standing, she used the family's name every chance she got. "Are you looking forward to the new exhibit?" Deanna tilted her head to appraise Audrey's dress, made of pale green silk printed with purple irises. She didn't appear to notice the brooch. Then again, when it came to the family jewelry, Deanna had always been most interested in her grandmother's diamond-encrusted watch, an anniversary gift from Audrey's late husband. Deanna repeated her question about the exhibit louder, even though Audrey had heard her perfectly well the first time. Her granddaughter often spoke to her the same way she spoke to her 10-year-old son. Audrey nodded. As a member of the museum's board, she had studied the oversized color photographs of ancient Filipino artifacts. A stem cup and footed jarlet discovered in Leda Leda Cave, a copper plate inscribed in Kavi, blue and white porcelain from Palawan, a death mask made of gold, burial jars from the late Neolithic period, some with traces of their original red paint. It was astonishing, really, what survived, hidden deep within the earth while battles raged. That was The Good Luck Stone. Thank you for listening, and goodbye, Main Library.
Hi, I'm author Holly Becker, and I'm going to read from the book Bedhead, A Hair-Raising Adventure. For the 100th time, Eli, get back in bed. It's time to go to sleep, said Eli's mom. Zzz. Finally, I thought he'd never go to sleep tonight, said Siler. Psst, psst. Hey, Charlie, wake up. Go get Devin, Isaac, and Zoe. Wake everyone up. It's time for fun. We only have 9 hours to play. Red Rover, send Zoe right over, called Devin. Who wants to play limbo, asked Joaquin. Me, screamed Josephina. Can I be the rope? Look, Siler, I found some fuzz. Want to play volleyball, asked Lily. Let's swing. I want to go first, said Giovanni. No, I want to go first, asserted Braxton. You went first last time, Braxton, argued Ben. Settle down, kids. You must play fair and take turns, said Miss Auburn. Time for dance class, said Miss Harriet. 1, 2, 3, sway left to right. Now front to back and repeat, she instructed. This would be so much easier with feet, moaned Gracie. Oh no, Eli's rolling over. Take cover. I can't see. I'm afraid of the dark. I'm squished. You're lying on my head, Gracie. I'm claustrophobic. I need some space. Get me out of here. I'm gonna hyperventilate. Mila, help us. Tickle Eli's ear. He'll roll back over. Yeah, it's like a roller coaster, baby. I'm so dizzy I might throw up. Stop complaining. I think I have a split end. Hold on to your follicles. Run for cover. Freeze, everyone. Assume the position. Eli's waking up. I repeat, do not move. My goodness, Eli, I'd say you have a terrible case of bedhead this morning, said his mom. Was there a party in your hair last night? You need to brush your hair. But I don't like my hair flat. I like it sticking up. You can't go to school like that. Come here. Stop, Mom. That's what cats do to their babies. Gross. Now I have Mom spit on me. Don't be so dramatic, Mila. You'd think after 7 years of this happening every morning that you'd be used to it by now. At least it's organic. Goodbye, Main Library.
Hi, I'm Tracy Montross with American Airlines. I'm also a new board member for the Mecklenburg County Library Board of Trustees. Dina DiOrio tagged me in this challenge so that we could say goodbye to the main library and celebrate its next chapter. We read every night in my household, so tonight I'm going to read to my son Jackson from one of his favorite books, The Day the Crayons Quit. And here's the green crayon, writing to. Dear Duncan, as green crayon, I am writing for 2 reasons. One is to say that I like my work. Loads of crocodiles, trees, dinosaurs, and frogs. I have no problems and wish to congratulate you on a very successful coloring things green career so far. The second reason I write is for my friends, Yellow Crayon and Orange Crayon, who are no longer speaking to each other. Both crayons feel they should be the color of the sun. Please settle this soon because they're driving the rest of us crazy. Your happy friend, Green Crayon. We read every night in my household, and I hope you're sharing literacy with your youngsters as well. Thanks, Dina, for tagging me, and I'll tag another friend to participate.
Hi, my name is Hope Anderson, and I'm reading from my novel, When the Moon Winks. Chapter 1. Helen Ferry watched as the waiter poured champagne into her crystal flute. She looked across the table at Frank, and for a moment felt pity for her husband. He wasn't drinking, hadn't for years, and celebrations like this one, their 30th wedding anniversary, had become rather lopsided. She generally drank a little too much while he sat glowering over his steak and mashed potatoes, making little train tracks in the white mush with his fork and picking the red onion out of his salad. Where had the carefree Frank gone, Helen wondered, and sipped more of her bubbly champagne. In truth, Frank had never been carefree and bubbly. He'd always been too serious for words. Ever since she'd known him, he had surrounded himself with death. He drove ambulances in college, volunteered for the Peace Corps in war-torn Africa, and then opened a mortuary. So tell me, what are you thinking, dearest? Helen blurted out, trying to change the chatter going on in her mind. She moved the vase of multicolored summer roses to the side. They were now an unnecessary obstruction. Not much. Work. All work, no play makes Frank a dull boy, Helen whispered, and she reached over the table and took his hand in hers. He then quickly withdrew his hand from hers and excused himself to go to the men's room. Helen watched Frank almost race across the room, and she felt her stomach tense. There was something wrong, something she couldn't quite get a handle on. It was probably the wine, she thought. Is champagne actually called wine? He returned from the men's room. In her eyes, he was calmer, less gloomy. She felt relief. Did I tell you? I've gotten a new contract on a series, The Sexual Politics of Shakespeare's Italian Plays. They want me to do a tour with it, this time in the wine country in Italy. Wouldn't that be delicious? We can have such a good time. Frank lifted his fork methodically to his lips, and between bites he kept cutting his steak into tiny strips, his mind absent from hers. Oh, that's right, I forgot. You don't eat pasta, and you don't drink wine, she remarked, a little annoyed. All Helen wanted, all she ever really wanted, was appreciation for all she had accomplished. Never getting it from Frank, she turned into a solo warrior, overcoming obstacles, shattering glass ceilings, soldiering her way to the top of her career. Now here she stood, waving a victory flag, feeling hollow and empty, as she stared across the table at her spouse. Frank reached out and took both of her hands into his, this time looking at her with an intensity that sent goosebumps up her bare arms, in a nice way. Indeed, Helen felt the promise of something good ahead. Affection and adoration were around the bend, she thought. She felt herself getting warm with desire. She gazed at him provocatively, determined to seduce him. It had been too long. Frank might not have been much, but here he was here. If she had to, Helen could always close her eyes and dream he was someone else. But they finished their entrees in silence, passed on dessert, and made their way home. Chapter 2. The next morning, Helen woke from dreams of oceans, beaches, and frosty drinks to the chill of their bedroom. They had turned off the air conditioning after a long stretch of late summer heat and had left the windows open to a forecast of cooler temperatures. The cool air felt divine, Helen thought, and she hugged her pillow tightly to her chest. The perfect beginning to a perfect Saturday. At dinner the night before, Frank had promised her a surprise. This dear, solid, slightly boring Frank, who had stuck by her all these years, had a surprise. She imagined he would go the traditional route and give her a rope of pearls, all milky and luminescent. She would wear them with her little black dress as they went out to dinner again, and he ate the same things he always ate, again. Filet mignon, mashed potatoes, salad. God, life with Frank was so boring and predictable. She should have known, but how could she have known when she first met him as an undergraduate? He sat behind her every day in Astronomy 101, a little goofy and severe in his shiny black shoes and uniform, taking copious notes, but never saying a word. Meanwhile, she felt his eyes boring holes in her peasant blouse during each class. He may not have been the most attractive guy, but he was pleasant-looking enough with his duck-down hair and piercing blue eyes. Besides, she had recently been burned by Webb Richards, her high school sweetheart, so after weeks of gentle flirtation, she went ahead and made the play.
Hi, my name is Jack Allison, and I'm going to be reading from my memoir, The Warm Heart of Africa, an outrageous adventure of love, music, and mishaps in Malawi. So I'm going to be reading from a chapter entitled My African Dog. How I Met a German Shepherd Named Hank is truly amazing, and what evolved thereafter, even more so. But forget that name, for he was soon given a new one. As a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer, PCV, who had only been in the country for 4 months, I'd ridden my motorcycle into Blantyre, the commercial capital of Malawi, to record my second health education song. I was on my way to the Peace Corps office to pick up my cycle after the recording session of Ufa wa Mtedza, translated loosely as the Peanut Butter Song, which, to my surprise, became the #1 song in Malawi for the next 3 years. Yet that's another story. Within a block of reaching the PC office, I noticed a couple walking toward me with a beautiful dog on a leash. "Nice dog," I exclaimed. The young man looked at me and smiled. "Want him?" "You're joking, right?" I asked. "Nope. He's yours if you want him." Quickly, they explained that they were PCVs who were leaving Malawi after the first year of their 2-year tour as secondary school teachers because their marriage had melted down. They'd been living on Likoma Island, which within Lake Malawi, and apparently spending too much time alone together had done them in. They had not been afforded the luxury of the poet's admonition, "Let there be spaces in your togetherness." When I expressed my ambivalence, yes, I would love to accept the dog, yet I had ahead of me a 100-mile round trip back to my village on a motorcycle. They both chimed in. He was facile at riding on the cycle and simply showed me what to do. After patting on my helmet and cranking up, I patted the gas tank and said, "Up, Hank," and he hopped up at once, put his paws across the handlebars, then turned around and licked my face. I was stunned, yet incredibly happy that I suddenly possessed such a fantastic dog. The trip back to Nsialudzu village was not uneventful. It was long and tiring, similar to when I'd been driven there by Laurie 4 months earlier for my new assignment. The differences were stark. Instead of the stifling cab of a loud, smelly, rusty, uncomfortable Bedford lorry, I was riding on a motorcycle in the open air, albeit with a dog on my lap, fearing what I would do were he to suddenly jump off at 40 miles an hour. Being scared kept me hyper alert, especially for the first half hour. Yet because Hank was calm and relaxed, I became more at ease as our trip progressed. Then he whimpered and licked my face, notifying me that he had to pee. When I pulled over, Hank ran across the tarmac to chase a ferret. As I ambled into the luxuriant woods and commenced to, quote-unquote, shake hands with the unemployed, as one of my college roommates referred to taking a leak, I suddenly realized I was not alone. I was surrounded by a troop of baboons. There I was, holding on to my claim to fame, when I noticed something move slightly. When I looked around, I was indeed surrounded, the gray fur of the baboons blending in with the enveloping brush. I stood very still, yet slowly made eye contact with many members of the troop. There were females with babies, either suckling or at least hanging on. What appeared to be the alpha male stared at me, although his eyes were not menacing. He was closer than 15 feet away, with a few others even closer. After a few long moments, he grunted slowly, began to move away, and the others gradually began to follow him, their big red arses disappearing as I finally finished my business. Thank you so much. Goodbye, Maine Library, and cheers.
I will be reading from my novel, Bells for Eli. I'm Susan Zorinda. Some people can retain early memories, but for me, this is not true. For me, the day of the marigolds is my only detailed memory during the year when I was just over midway to my 4th birthday. I was patting dirt around a seedling while Mama held the fragile stalk steady when a loud and alarming cry shook us from our task. We looked up to see Pot. He'd been working in the yard, run from the side of the Winfield house with Eli in his arms. Mary Lily stood on the front porch watering ferns, and I watched her wide skirt fan out into a circle as she nearly stumbled in her haste down the white wooden steps toward Pot. Her straw hat flopped down low over her forehead. Mama pulled off her gardening gloves, and I tried to dash across the street, but she caught me. "No, Delia," she said. Her hands were tight on my shoulders. "Something's wrong with Eli," I wailed. "Whatever it is, we don't need to hamper them," she said. My mother shoved the new gardening gloves into the waistband of her blue check pedal pushers. I liked seeing my mother relaxed in her pedal pushers because in those days she nearly always wore a dress. Mama took my hand. Hers was damp. Together we hurried to the edge of our front yard, close enough to hear, but we did not cross the street. Pot had caught up to Mary Lily at the bottom of the steps. We were in hearing range, but he talked so fast I had to grasp at phrases. Pot Hawkins works for the Winfields, but to say he's their gardener hardly begins to identify his place in their world. His family has been connected to Mary Lily's maybe since the end of slavery. All I know is he and his mother Caro have lived in their little house out in the country on Lauderdale land all my life. "That red devil lie in the Coca-Cola bottle Mr. Jean done left on the back stoop," I heard him say, "for them balloons." And then, for a while, I could not follow the words until I heard, "Mr. Eli drunk some of it." I heard Eli breathing, even from across the street. I thought he was choking because his face was contorted, his cheeks sucking in. "My God, oh God, help me, Pot. Get Ellison into the house." "Milk, he needs milk," Mary Lily screamed. My mother began to run toward our house, pulling me by the hand. "What is Red Devil Lie?" I sputtered as I slipped and staggered alongside her, trying to keep my arm in its socket, but she didn't answer. Inside the house she made a call, and I heard her say the name of our street. Then she sat with her head in her hands. "What is Red Devil Lie?" I asked again. "It cleans drains, but my brother must have been using it to blow up balloons for the party." "Did Uncle Gene hurt Eli?" I asked. "I'm sorry, baby," she said, and smoothed my hair. "I can't explain it. I have to be quiet and think what to do." She picked up a pencil and paper and began to write. The next thing I remember was the deafening shriek of the ambulance siren and Mama jolting from her chair. Again, she grabbed my hand and began to run. I kept up better this time, and unlike before, we crossed the street, yet we stood back, waiting. I watched terrified as two men in white waist-length coats brought Eli out on a stretcher. His arms bent in at the elbows and stuck out like wings. I saw his mouth opening and closing, and then he vomited on himself. I heard him heaving. One of the men took the bottom of the sheet covering Eli and wiped away the yellow spew. Mary Lily hurried behind the stretcher, but before she climbed into the ambulance, she looked toward Mama. She was crying while she talked. "Call Dr. Crawford and tell him we are on our way to the hospital in Columbia, not Green Branch." As a child, I loved our doctor, but I feared him too, for visits to his office often resulted in a painful shot of penicillin. Even with a temperature of 103 degrees and a throat so swollen with pus I could hardly swallow without tears, I was never so sick that I didn't dread the needle burning into my hip. So at the mention of Dr. Crawford, I knew Eli must be very sick. The ambulance turned on its siren again and pulled away from the curb. Mary Lily and Pot and Eli were all inside. Suddenly the vehicle stopped and Mary Lily opened the back door and leaned out, calling to Mama. "Dear God, Jeanette, find Gene, tell him." And then the ambulance was gone, carrying Eli away in a loud blur of wheels and warning bells. Goodbye, Main Library.
Hello, I'm Dina DiOrio, Mecklenburg County Manager. Next month, the Charlotte community is invited to join a series of events to help say goodbye to the Main Library as it prepares to turn the page on an important chapter in its history. One for the Books is a community celebration of the Main Library's rich history and upcoming rebirth as it prepares to be demolished to create a new and improved building for residents to enjoy. I love libraries because of the access they provide to literature, technology, and so much more. There is something for everyone to enjoy. Today, I'm reading one of my favorite passages from Where the Crawdad Sings, written by Delia Owens. The story revolves around a girl named Kia who cannot read. Kia was failed by so many systems in our society, from her family to the school system and more. Yet Kia yearns to be able to read and understand the world. In the story, Kia is taught to read by a friend. On every trip to Kia's, Tate took school or library books, especially on marsh creatures and biology. Her progress was startling. She could read anything now, he said, and once you can read anything, you can learn everything. It was up to her. Nobody comes close to filling their brains, he said. We're all like giraffes, not using their necks to reach the higher leaves. Like Kia in the...
I'm Judy Selden Cohen, and I'm reading my essay, Beyond Casseroles, from the anthology Impact, Personal Portraits of Activism. I bring my first foil-wrapped casserole for people experiencing homelessness to my synagogue a year or two after I moved to Charlotte. On cold winter nights, a local agency arranges to shelter people experiencing homelessness in multi-purpose rooms and fellowship halls. When it's my synagogue's turn to unfold 12 cots in a clean, safe, heated space, my supper club of newcomers to the congregation signs up to help. Instead of meeting in one of our homes, a dozen of us bring an expanded version of our monthly potluck to the synagogue social hall. I make turkey tetrazzini, soft food that's not too spicy, accommodating teeth and bellies that might appreciate some gentleness. Despite the stark differences in where each of us will sleep that night, the supper club hosts find common ground with the synagogue's overnight guests as we all share a meal together. The following winter, I bring a casserole to my friend Merle's townhouse. Every Christmas, our synagogue provides food for a shelter to relieve the church volunteers immersed in their own holiday preparations. Merle organizes the synagogue collection, filling the refrigerators in both her kitchen and her garage with donations. Turkey tetrazzini in a foil casserole pan for my synagogue again. Casseroles constitute an important part of addressing homelessness. People living in shelters or lining up at soup kitchens need a hot meal. Those of us in housing possess the resources to cook for those who lack housing. We avert the crisis of hunger among people experiencing homelessness when we lower housing costs so that a paycheck covers rent and meals, with enough remaining for medication, gas, car repairs, and childcare. Casseroles serve as a gateway for many like me who choose to not only help people in the crisis of homelessness, but also to work for systems change. Goodbye, Main Library. I'm Judy Selden Cohen, and I'm reading from Recharging Judaism, How Civic Engagement is Good for Synagogues, Jews, and America, the book that I co-authored with Rabbi Judith Schindler. Activists of many faiths tell the following parable to preach the power of leveraging volunteerism as the first step in alleviating suffering. A villager sees a stranger thrashing in the current of the nearby river. Without stopping to think, the villager jumps into the river and pulls the stranger to safety. Soon, a schedule of lifeguards is established, and every few days, another villager is hailed as a local hero after pulling another stranger from the river. As more and more resources are devoted to rescues, finally, someone stands up and says, maybe we should travel upstream and see why so many people are falling into the river. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. praises this volunteerism or social service for allaying hardship, while also exhorting us to address the root causes of that hardship through seeking social justice. So it is with Jews volunteering in the community. We can line the proverbial river with lifeguards, pulling out strangers who fall into the current of hard times. And we can also travel upstream in civic engagement, enlisting our synagogues to remedy the sources of this suffering. When congregants accept civic engagement as a fundamentally Jewish obligation alongside Torah study, communal prayer, and acts of loving kindness, then we have successfully transformed our synagogues into institutions that will heal our souls, both when we are inside and outside those walls. As we accomplish the work of civic engagement through our synagogues, but not necessarily inside our synagogues, we also connect the loosely affiliated Jew more meaningfully to our Jewish community. As congregations across the country bring Jewish and American values of human dignity, equality, and equity to their communities, they are also teaching congregants an expression of Judaism that is relevant to their modern lives. Living our faith requires us to respond to America's problems, even if we cannot solve them completely, nor solve them all. Goodbye, Main Library.
Hello, my name is Valerie Niemann, and I'm going to read from my poetry collection called Leopard Lady, A Life in Verse. And I'll read 3 poems from this. It's set in an American sideshow in the mid-20th century. The Leopard Lady speaks. This leopard skin come onto me when I lost love. This is not for the marks to know. When my man's absence set a hot kindle of distrust that blowed back on me as lack of faith in what is more worthy than some handful of spit and dust. No wonder I lost my natural color, trying to be all things to him, and him not wanting what I ever was or become or any between, turning away like a spoilt child, turning away like the sun eat up by the moon, and not my doing or undoing. I scourged my soul, turning myself inside out to make him a better tent against the weather of the world, stretching myself across his failings like a worn-through quilt on a wide, cold bed. There wasn't enough left of me to fill a thimble then, but I gathered myself back up and stood, feet reasonable to the earth, liver and light settling back like I'd been dropped from a high place. And I was about satisfied. But the letting go of that man, him of me, then me of him, left me streaked, specked, and spotted like the flocks of Jacob, and I opened my mouth to say the true things that underprop this world. I could take as omens. I hear the owl bark, hoo-hoo, hoo-hoo, hoo, like a dog chained. And why, when owl has wings and eyes that it should mourn, I don't know. Any more than night-passing geese go baying high up by the moon. Hounds on blood, a pack digging its nails into the sky and turning up stars. The leopard lady tells her spots. Don't be looking for what's daubed on that banner. The leopard lady, naked in the jungle, brown skin all over with black spots like wallpaper on a wall. I'm more so like a spotted hound, or the rump of the Appaloosie our trick rider uses, white strode over dark, but truly, like the banner says, I am alive. Inside the tent, I rest on a high stool, wrapped in red, till the professor brings them round and spiels a story that ain't mine. I keep my back to the crowd, but they spy my hands, spotted like trout fish, resting on my shoulders. I hear them rustle and breathe. Then I let the silk slide down. Nothing there, one says out. My back is perfect brown, except for a patch on my backbone just above the spangly girdle I wear for modesty, but it's scarce that. The silk be whispering louder than them as the kimono falls and I turn and stand. They see me top to toe, all over speckled, face to breast to ankles, my affliction being such that where one side is marked, so will be the other. Here I am. Then the light dims down. The crowd shuffles along to see the terrible snake man of the Amazon, and I gather up my red to cover my nakedness. Thank you and goodbye, Main Library.
Hi, my name is Vidya Mullick and I'm going to read to you from my book, The Adventures of Grandpa and Ray. This book is a picture book and it's about my son and the wonderful times that he shared with his grandfather. Before I start, I just want to thank the Charlotte Mecklenburg Library for giving us an opportunity to do this. Thank you. The Adventures of Grandpa and Ray. Grandpa and Ray were a happy twosome. To them, life was a joy, never tiresome. Not a moment in the day did they let slip away to enjoy little pleasures that life sent their way. Oft they would walk hand in hand on lush green grass or on grainy sand, and delight in the sensations that arose when they touched Mother Earth with their bare toes. Time stood still as they gazed in awe, as wondrous nature around them they saw, in shades of colors from purple to teal, or ants that marched in rhythm with zeal. The majestic trees in spring or fall, with bountiful leaves or that had bare it all, at dewdrops on a rose that glistened in the sun, at a complex web that a spider had spun. On rainy days they stepped in puddles too, and waited in eagerness to spot a rainbow or two. Prodded little worms to see how they coil, together they enjoyed the scent of the rain-kissed soil. Grandpa explained to Ray the marvels of the universe, the sound of the ocean when they held a shell to their ears, the beautiful butterfly that emerged from a cocoon, the wondrous recurring phases of the moon. At night, the two would watch funny shows on the telly and laugh out loud, deep guffaws from the belly. Later savor every bite of dessert, be it ice cream, cake, or frozen yogurt. At bedtime, Grandpa spoke to Ray of days gone by, how he dreamed of flying as a very young boy, the story of his brother who marched in the war, of the rickety old engine that was his first car. Thus life was a joy for Grandpa and Ray. Countless moments of fun did fill their day, deeply in touch with their inner selves, in love with nature and themselves. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Bess Kirscher, and today I'm going to be reading from my middle grade novel, Now and at the Hour. I'm just going to start at the beginning. The boy wants to look away, but he can't take his eyes off the beautiful black and white beast rolling in the surf. It's battered against the rocks with each wave, then dragged back out, only to come tumbling forward again. At first, he can't tell what exactly he's seeing, but when the sun hits upon a dorsal fin, he realizes it's a young shark. A crowd has started to gather at the shore. People pull out their phones and begin to take pictures and videos. Every time the waves retreat, the boy hopes they'll be strong enough to force the shark back to where it belongs. Instead, the opposite is happening. The shark gets closer and closer to the shore. One thing is clear. This animal is suffering. The boy doesn't have a plan. He's not really thinking. He slips out of his shoes and gets rid of his phone. The water is so cold, and the shark is a shark. None of that matters, though. All he knows is there's no way he's going to just stand there and watch something die. Summer, Chapter 1, Tricks and Lies. The craziest thing isn't that I decided to post my most embarrassing moment on YouTube. The craziest thing is that it had been Mom's idea. Then again, that's the way me and Mom usually roll. Except in this case, we're talking about a skateboarding video, and that can be a little different. It's probably the only major thing we don't have in common. I don't take it personally, though. Flint and Jabari have the same deal as me. All of our moms hate that we board. Well, maybe hate's a strong word, but they all worry a lot about the fact that we board, and we do it on the streets of San Francisco, which I admit has really steep hills. So sweet. But that's not our fault. We live here. Are we supposed to get on a plane and fly to someplace really flat and boring every time we want to skateboard? I don't think so. We've agreed to wear helmets when we do it, which is pretty annoying, but I get it. And to mostly stick to the parks, but only certain parts of the park, and not at night, and always with someone else. It had been a real pain to hammer out these details. But once we had, I was typically good to go without getting a lot of grief, and I've never given Mom a real reason to shut it down, until earlier today. I had tried to sneak past her this morning through the back door and over to the bathroom to grab a towel to stop the blood, but there was no way to avoid the kitchen, and that's where she was parked. I pulled the sleeve of my hoodie until it wrapped over my whole hand, covering my arm completely. I could feel the wetness seep into the sleeve. I stretched the whole mess tight around the scrapes on my stomach. Tears burned my eyes when it brushed against the skin, but I shut that right down. I set my face like normal, except with a little smile. It wasn't one of those times that I wanted to lie to her, even though there was no choice now. It was more that I didn't want her to feel bad about boarding. And okay, I really didn't want her to feel bad about me. A long time ago, I hadn't cared about that. I couldn't because I was little. There were problems that you might say were my fault. Or if you were sister, you'd say it's not fair to talk about fault because of all the stuff that had happened to us. These are details that aren't important. This is. I hurt my mom a lot. It's my worst thing. It won't ever happen again. So I tried to bust past her as fast as I could, like I really had to pee. I would have made it too. She had her nose all in the newspaper and her coffee, which is her favorite thing in life. And at least I'm really good at getting the story solid when I'm hurt. It's like I do the opposite of panic. Like when the basketball had come flying across the gym and landed weird and hard on my finger, I knew then that the drama was going to be too much for her. So I told my first no worries little white lie that I just liked wearing skate gloves all the time. I kept the bandage underneath, out of sight. She never actually knew that it was broken. One day we held our hands palm to palm to see how big mine was compared to hers, and her eyes landed on the crooked finger and got real wide. She looked at me and was quiet, except to close her fingers over mine and squeeze them a little. She never asked. I never told. As I went past, she grabbed my shirt from the back and pulled it toward her. I'm betting this was for a quick kiss on the cheek, which I usually don't fight, but this time the pulling ripped the fabric from my cuts. The shock of it threw me totally off my game. I yelled and she jumped and knocked over her coffee and let out a little scream. And then she saw the blood and let out a big one. Thanks for listening, and goodbye, Public Library.
Hi, I'm Catherine Farley, and I'm the author of the Explore with Mimi children's book series, which features a beloved deer named Mimi, who is quite curious and sometimes mischievous. Mimi explores the South Carolina Lowcountry on the islands of Seabrook, Sullivan's, and Kiowa. She meets tons of animal friends and learns lessons about friendship, teamwork, believing in yourself, and faith. I'd like to read a little bit from Mimi Discovers Sullivan's Island so you get a flavor for what Mimi explores. Mimi lifts her head, admiring the bright shining stars and the beaming lighthouse. Wow, we learned an awesome lesson tonight. Paying attention to a light can guide us to the right place in this world, a place where we are meant to be. Thank you for following the light and finding me tonight, Ray whispers. Tomorrow is a new day, and we're going to explore more of Sullivan's Island, caws Poe. Good night, my dear friends. If you're interested in reading more of Mimi's adventures, I encourage you to check out these books at the Charlotte Library. Goodbye and thank you, library.
I'm Kathy F. Rio, and I'm going to read from my book, Rock, Paper, Scissors, Scenes from a Charmed Divorce. Fall 2015. It's Parents' Weekend in Chapel Hill, and Stuart and I decide to ride together to go see our daughter, Julia. On the drive back home, he and I land on the topic of dating. At the time, we are both single, and he begins to enlighten me on some of the new dating websites. A prolific dater, something I'm still adjusting to given the man I thought I knew, he encourages me to sign up for one of the newer sites that puts the woman in charge of reaching out. Once home, I decide to get on Bumble.com, and within a few moments, I'm swiping through an array of men my age. Is it more bizarre that he suggests I try out Bumble, or that he is one of the very first matches that pops up on my phone? Or perhaps most bizarre is seeing him there and finding his photo and bio appealing as if I hadn't known him since he was 18, seeing him for the first time at age 50 in a purple striped button-down shirt I didn't know he owned, exuding the same quiet confidence that pulled me in the first time. Who is this man now? Would I choose him again? Finance jackass by day, Southern gentleman by night, it reads, and my chuckle turns teary before I swipe left. While I have no interest in dating Stuart again, we are inextricably linked by a shared history spanning more than 3 decades. Who else knows he wants Be Thou My Vision played at his funeral, and preferably the Van Morrison version, though I suppose he'd settle for a group hymn rendition if secular music were frowned upon in the church like it was when we married in 1992. He hasn't remarried and doesn't have a significant other in his life right now. So does that make me the default funeral planner? Are his daughters old enough at 18 and 20 to plan it? Are his elderly parents expected or expecting to do it? As I imagine it, the service would be overflowing with middle-aged prepsters driving dark SUVs and wearing expensive ties with tiny patterns of rabbits or horses or fish. There'd be a big turnout of his fraternity brothers in particular. They'd whisper "fi-fi" to each other, or maybe just express it in glances, the secret code word whose meaning he'd never confess, but that I took to mean something like, "For real, man, I speak the truth here." Among the inner circle of brothers, there's a pack of them who descend upon Las Vegas each spring for March Madness, 25 years plus running, and then travel to the Kentucky Derby 6 weeks later. The whole posse is on second wives, one on a third, but the man in the urn at this imagined funeral held to his word that he'd never marry again. At the service, our girls would be stoic. They look most like me, but have their daddy's uncanny ability to curb emotion. They'd be the loveliest creatures there, floating through the afternoon with pluck and poise. Their mother wouldn't be faring nearly as well. The girls were 10 and 12 when we told them we were separating. The day of the scheduled announcement was a beautiful Friday afternoon in late spring. Earlier in the day, Stuart and I met at a nearby lake for a divorce ritual that I had planned for the two of us. I had a photo book of our life together, 3 days in the making, and was eager to share it with him. From our first meeting at Myers Park High School in 1984 to the family vacation we'd recently taken with the girls to Key West, I was honoring the 26 years we'd spent in each other's orbit, and I was terribly proud of it. Ultimately, for our girls, I wanted to show them all the happy years and prove we didn't marry the wrong person. I walked away to give him privacy as he flipped through the book. He finished much sooner than I would have imagined. "It looks like a funeral," he said. Goodbye, Main Library.
I love Charlotte Mecklenburg Library because it feeds my imagination and my curiosity. The Carolina Room at the main library has been my go-to source for local history, like when I was researching the 1913 murder on South Street, involving the doctor who built my house in Davidson and his friend-turned-enemy, the town druggist. A librarian taught me how to check out ebooks. And libraries are a source of escape for me. I'm reading from Neil Gaiman's Neverwhere. He is somewhere deep beneath the ground in a tunnel, perhaps, or a sewer. Light comes in flickers, defining the darkness, not dispelling it. He is not alone. There are other people walking beside him, although he cannot see their faces. They are running now through the inside of the sewer, splashing through the mud and filth. Droplets of water fall slowly through the air, crystal clear in the darkness. He turns a corner, and the beast is waiting for him. Goodbye, Maine.
Hello, my name is Kathleen Basie. I'm the author of A Song for the Road, which is the story of a musician on a cross-country road trip to honor her lost family. And I'm going to read you an excerpt from her first road trip stop, which is at a radio telescope in West Virginia. Miriam clasped the chain link fence. The emptiness around her, the emptiness within, cried out to be filled, the way she'd filled the endless ticking seconds of the past year. Of the days and weeks following her family's death, she remembered very little. She could rattle off everything they sang at the funeral, every well-meaning but insensitive comment, but the events themselves had vanished from her memory. For weeks, every waking moment had been devoted to the struggle to draw breath, and every sleeping one to surviving the nightmares. It was like being pinned to a dartboard, never knowing when the next projectile would come squealing out of the mist. And truthfully, there wasn't much of substance to remember. For years, her life had involved a planner, tightly packed with school presentations and doctor visits, rehearsals and camps, with informational forms paper-clipped onto certain weeks and lists tucked into the cover, baking breads and meals and desserts, deep cleaning the house, learning accompaniments for solos, and drawing up music lists for church while waiting at cello or piano lessons. Madness. Always madness. And then suddenly nothing. No one to talk to, no one who needed her, nothing to fill the emptiness, nothing to occupy her mind or her hands, just never-ending nights waiting for the sun to rise and never-ending days waiting for it to set again. Memories. Memories and self-recrimination. Getting busy had changed all that, and one morning when the maple tree outside her window was just beginning to blush and school breaks were shrieking along the residential streets, Miriam woke to the realization that she'd slept through the night. A few days later, she'd smiled at a video on Facebook, and she'd thought, I might actually survive this. The breeze settled into stillness. A cow mooed, the sound muted by distance and echoing faintly off the telescope. If she sang out here amid this great emptiness, would the silence swallow her voice, or would it, too, echo off that vast white dish and reverberate in her own heart? The cool breeze sighed through the pines, causing her gauzy skirt and the ribbon trailing from her hat to flutter, like the little thing with feathers perched on her soul and just now pulling its head from beneath its wing. Miriam glanced behind her. The road stood empty. She faced the telescope, raised herself into proper singing position, and let the air vibrate her vocal cords. For the beauty of the earth, for the glory of the skies. It was one of Blaze's favorite hymns, but in this great, vast emptiness, her voice sounded small, hesitant. She put a little more muscle behind the sound. For the joy of human love, brother, sister, parent, child. Her voice cracked. Silence swallowed the sound as if it had never been. Miriam wove her fingers into the fence again and bowed her head. Please, she whispered. It was the best she could come up with. Silence. What had she expected? A cosmic event? An angelic visitation? Communing with landmarks couldn't fix what was wrong with her. The little bird in her soul dove for cover. Miriam shoved backward and shook her fist at the telescope. You're just a stupid, inanimate object. What the hell am I doing singing to you anyway? Her words bounced off the dish like a mischievous sprite poking fun at her temper tantrum and disappeared into the great emptiness. And then, with a hum of electricity and the whirring of motors, the white behemoth beyond the fence began to move. Goodbye, Main Library.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Barkinshaw, and I'm a Japanese-American author here in Charlotte, and today I'm going to be reading from my middle grade historical fiction, The Last Cherry Blossom, and I'll be reading a few pages from chapter 6. I went upstairs and sat on the veranda to finish my plum while I waited for Papa. I put my feet up on the wicker table, something I would never try inside for fear of Aunt Kimiko yelling at me, and wiped the plum juice from my hands onto my skirt. I noticed a scraping sound coming from our yard below. I stood on my tiptoes and leaned over the veranda's railing. It was dusk, and my eyes strained to see clearly, but it looked as if some men were standing below, digging something with shovels. "Konnichiwa! Good afternoon!" I shouted. They looked up and waved, then left the yard abruptly. "Joya, what is so interesting down there?" I jumped. "You startled me, Papa." "I am sorry. I did not mean to." "Papa, there were some men down there digging." "Oh, yes. I thought I would plant more shrubs. It is getting late, and I guess they will be back tomorrow to finish." I gave him a puzzled look. It was an odd time to be planting anything in the yard. We'd never done that this late in the season before. I moved toward Papa so he could brush the oil through my hair. It took a long time, and tonight he wasn't as talkative as usual. "Is something wrong, Papa? You are so quiet tonight," I finally asked in barely a whisper. He sighed. "Joya, some days I am discouraged by the news I print about the war." "But Japan is winning the war. How can that be discouraging?" I swiveled my body so he could brush the other section of my hair. "A few years ago, I believed we were winning, but now I am not so sure," Papa said solemnly. I felt a chill travel up my spine to the nape of my neck. Victories were reported daily at school. I never thought that losing the war was even possible. I turned to face Papa and stammered as I asked, "So Japan could lose?" He pushed the bangs out of my eyes and said, "We have been fighting for 7 long years. Our army supplies have been drained." He helped twist me back around and continued to brush my hair. "What do you mean, Papa?" "Well, for one thing, we need to build more planes, but have no metal to do that with." I knew that we had no metal to use at school, but I hadn't thought about the government, that they couldn't have a shortage that would stop them from manufacturing planes. "Is that why Matsu-san came by yesterday, to collect whatever spare metal we had laying around the house?" "I did not know she had come yesterday. Who did she speak with?" "Aunt Kimiko. She told Matsu-san to stop by once you were at home." "Well, I will deal with Matsu-san later. War is not something we need to be discussing, Joya. I want to hear about your day." He finished wrapping my hair in a big towel. We both took a seat on the wicker bench and put our feet up on the table. My nerves would not be subdued. It frightened me to think our country could be on the losing side of the war. Before I could stop myself, I asked, "Papa, what would happen to us if Japan lost the war?" "I will keep my family safe at all costs. Know this, Joya. You are my life, and I will give mine to save yours." "Papa, do not talk that way. I do not want to be here if you are not." I felt tears building in my eyes and leaned my head to rest on Papa's shoulder, squeezing his hand. He squeezed back and said, "But that is how life is, Yuriko-chan. In our lives, we must experience both beginnings as well as endings. It is like the season changing after the last cherry blossom falls." And that, I think, is the perfect way to say, "Sayonara, goodbye, library. Thank you."
Hi there, I'm Kristen Rademacher, and I'm going to be reading from my book, From the Lake House, A Mother's Odyssey of Loss and Love, and I'm going to read part of the opening chapter. Chapter 1, The Dock. Lowering myself to my bedroom's cool tile floor, I leaned against the cornflower blue wall, pulled my knees into my chest, and looked around. A dust bunny, carried by a breeze, streaming in through the open window, floated past my ankles and landed in front of 2 canvas bags. The movers had hauled away furniture and boxes and lamps and plants, and all that was left in my house was my elderly cat cowering in the bathroom and these bags. A jewelry box in one bag housed dangly beaded earrings, silver necklaces, a few pendants, and 1 string of pearls, a gift from an ex-boyfriend. I'd worn the pearls at cocktail parties and swanky restaurants when I'd lived in Boston, but they'd never left the velvet-lined drawer after moving to Chapel Hill. Though unnecessary and frankly silly, I had safeguarded my modest assortment of trinkets and ornaments from a ride in the moving truck. A small birch picture frame poked out of the second bag. Behind the glass was a set of tiny footprints, and inching myself closer, I tried looking at them with new eyes, hoping to uncover something different about the pattern on the heels and big toe mounds, or the way the toes were nearly perfectly spaced apart. But I couldn't. I stared at them too often, their image permanently etched in my mind. The frame used to sit on the windowsill beside a pink bowl, where I had 2 Polaroids, our hospital bracelets, the ultrasound photo, and several seashells I'd fervently gathered for her on a Florida trip after the goodbye. The bowl lay carefully wrapped in the bag, along with the floral hat box stuffed with condolence cards, 1 small diaper, and my plum-colored journal filled with letters to her and reflections on how to keep living. No way would Mover's hands touch the homage to my daughter. I was carrying it myself. I should get out of here, I said aloud. The Movers will wonder where I am. Facing the bank of windows, my eyes followed the gently rolling lawn, past the weeping willow and the dogwoods, past the patches of azaleas and hydrangeas, and down to the water. I had been renting the simple apartment of a beautiful home that sat on the shoreline of a small lake. It was here where I discovered that the outdoors held magic, that bird songs could uplift, and that amber and golden leaves could astonish with their sun-dappled dance. It was here where I no longer dreaded the swoop of emptiness descending like a fast-moving fog, my breath suddenly shallow, chest tight, body wanting to curl up like a potato bug. I learned to yield to sorrow and retreat to my easy chair, or to the patio next to the rose bushes, or the dock where ripples of water weaved through my toes. Part of me longed to extend the lease on this apartment, because it was here where I'd stop spinning. Finally, enfolded in the peaceful solitude of the lake house, I had looked inside myself, cultivated roots, and begun to heal. I stood at the dock one last time before placing my cat Max and the canvas bags in my aged Jetta. The air was warm for mid-March, and sunlight skipped along the lake's surface. A lone woman in a kayak glided by, stroke slow and steady, her red hat a burst of color against the still, pewter water. I watched until she disappeared. A mere 2 years earlier, on a chilly January afternoon, I had moved by myself into this apartment, after my life as I had known it had all but disappeared. Like a busted-up jigsaw puzzle, pieces of it had been scattered about, a few gone missing, and somehow I had to make myself whole again. That is it. Thank you so much, and goodbye to the main library.
Hey there, Landis Wade, Charlotte author and host of Charlotte Readers Podcast, where authors give voice to the written words. Got a novel coming out next spring. I've written 3 books, the Christmas Courtroom Trilogy, but this is my first full-length novel. It's called Deadly Declarations. This is the book cover that hasn't been released yet, but will be coming out soon. This book is set in the New South City of Charlotte, North Carolina. It involves 3 retirees from a retirement community who stumble into trying to solve the 250-year-old mystery of the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence. So what I thought I would do, I just thought I'd read the short author's note at the beginning of the book here to give you an idea about a little bit about the book. The Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence has been an enigma for close to 250 years. According to oral history, the Meck-Dec was signed in the turbulent wake of British hostilities at Lexington and Concord, when prominent Mecklenburg County citizens and militia leaders met in the North Carolina backwoods of Charlotte, the town George Washington called a trifling place. There at a log courthouse, they debated their future allegiance to King George, and with their passions high and their principles firm, they declared their independence on May 20th, 1775, for the most powerful nation in the world, assuming all risk attendant to their lives and property earned by such a treasonable act. Historians have treated the Meck-Dec with disdain, running the gamut from contempt to indifference. Many called it fake, others borrowed the words of Thomas Jefferson and called it spurious. Unlike Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, signed 1 year later, there is no surviving Meck-Dec document. And yet, locals continue to celebrate the day, and the date, May 20th, 1775, remains on the North Carolina state flag and on the Mecklenburg County seal.
Were the North Carolinians first in freedom, as one North Carolina state license plate says? Or was the MEC deck nothing more than a fabrication to gain favor in the nation's revolutionary history? There's no dispute that a meeting was held at the law courthouse in Charlotte on May 20, 1775, and that a tavern owner named Captain Jack rode his horse 500 miles to deliver documents from that meeting to the Continental Congress in Philadelphia. And there's no doubt that controversies followed: burned documents, missing documents, stolen documents, falsified documents. And yet, curiously, virtually identical phrases appeared in the MEC deck and the Declaration of Independence, raising this question: if the MEC deck did exist, who copied from whom? This story takes the themes of aging and career transitions, sets it all in a retirement community where three individuals come together, all from different backgrounds, to try to solve two mysteries. One, why was the manuscript that this 96-year-old man was working on missing when they found his body? And why did he have a handwritten will signed the day before he died that gave his $50 million fortune to Sue Ellen Parker, the most despised resident at the Independence Retirement Community, otherwise known as the Indy? At the urging of Chuck Yeager Alexander and Harriet Keaton, Craig Travail, the lawyer who has retired from his law firm after 40 years, having been forced out over an ethical issue with his managing partner, reluctantly decides to challenge the will in court and represent the granddaughter who's been cut out of the will. That decision puts these three characters in danger, and it leads them down a path that could allow them to discover the answers to a mystery that has evaded historians for 250 years. That is, if they don't die trying. Thanks, Mecklenburg Library. Goodbye, Mecklenburg Library. Hey there, I'm Landis Wade, author of The Christmas Heist. I'm going to read a little scene early in the book that's a courtroom scene involving Judge Stark. By the way, this is a cross between My Cousin Vinny and Miracle on 34th Street. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. This honorable court of the great state is now in session. The Honorable Augustus Langhorne Stark, judge presiding. Be seated and come to order. And with that, the judge walked purposely up the 3 steps to the bench he would call home for the next few days, and he sat down. Judge Stark had a stoic expression on his face. His pursed lips and drawn features did not convey kindness nor anger, but rather a seriousness of purpose that had become his calling card. Some in the courtroom who saw him take a seat on the bench that morning thought he looked indifferent, while others thought he was about to strike a legal blow at somebody. Others could not be sure, but one thing was for certain: neither Judge Stark nor his serious look went unnoticed by the attorneys and their clients who were waiting to appear before him. Judge Stark usually presided over felony criminal cases and large-dollar civil disputes, but the legislators in the capital city, believing they understood better than the judiciary how to run the court system, had decided that judges should be required to hear all kinds of cases, including misdemeanor criminal matters. This was just one of the many reasons Judge Stark was planning to retire. Judge Stark's rotation for the week placed him in criminal misdemeanor courtroom 3150, the courtroom he liked least of all. He had a reputation of being a person who wanted things to run smoothly, a man of order, a man of structure, and a man who believed that people should be on time and get to the point. Truth be told, this is the one courtroom where this hoped-for order, structure, and getting to the point tended to be the exception, not the rule. Courtroom 3150 went by the nickname the People's Court because it was regularly flooded with regular people committing regular crimes and getting regularly convicted. On the other hand, there was nothing regularly truthful about the stories told in the People's Court. The defendants, often short on education, were long on creativity when it came to telling their stories. Alibis were like poetry, defenses like good prose. Only on this day, Judge Stark would write the endings of each little tale. Getting right to work, the first case he ordered for trial was captioned "The State versus Henry Edmonds." Jason Peabody was the assistant district attorney on the case against Mr. Edmonds. It was unusual to find Judge Stark in courtroom 3150, but it was equally strange to see Peabody there. Peabody had 10 years of experience as a prosecutor and was good at his craft. On any given day in the People's Court, one would find a younger, less experienced prosecutor representing the interests of the state. The The fact that Peabody was here and not trying a felony case in another courtroom was a small mystery. In the People's Court, there is no jury. When you lose your case in courtroom 3150, you can appeal and get your jury trial. But in this court and on this day, Mr. Edmonds' fate was in the legal hands of the not-so-friendly-looking man on the bench. Mr. Peabody, Judge Stark said, I understand this is a case charging assault and petty larceny of some kind. Is that right? Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Edmonds is charged in the first count with assault, to wit, pushing the victim to the ground and causing her pain and suffering, and in the second count, larceny, to wit, stealing a flash drive from the victim. Mr. Edmonds has pleaded not guilty, and the state plans to prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Judge Stark seemed bored already. Call your first witness, Mr. Peabody. The first witness for the state was a white woman in her mid-20s, not unattractive, but a bit unkempt and tired-looking. She was thin and wore her long, straight brown hair parted in the middle. She wore blue jeans, work boots, and a sweatshirt with a high school logo. After being sworn in by the bailiff, she turned in her seat to face the assistant district attorney. Ma'am, Peabody said, please state your name for the record. Shelley, she answered. Judge Stark had been looking down at some papers on the bench and wondering how long this case was going to last, raised his head and eyebrows to look in the direction of the woman. Your full name, please, Peabody said, aware of the watchful eyes of Judge Stark. Shelley Barker, she responded, without realizing her infraction. Now, Miss Barker, where were you on the night of November 20th this year? I was minding my own business, that's for sure. Of course you were, Peabody said, looking down for a moment trying to act composed, and looking up again and looking directly at the witness, he asked Miss Congeniality if she could tell the court exactly where she was that night. I told you before you had a deputy drag me down here I was over the Tipsy Tavern on 9th Street. We certainly do appreciate your cooperation, Miss Barker, Peabody said, trying as hard as he could not to let the sarcasm he felt creep into his tone, but it certainly would aid the court if you could tell us what you were doing at the Tipsy Tavern on 9th Street. Well, I wasn't drunk, if that's what you're trying to find out. Judge Stark looked at Peabody as if to ask, where did you find such a bright and stellar lead-off witness? Thanks for the opportunity. Goodbye, Main Library.
Hi, I'm Walter Sanders. I'm giving a shout-out to the Main Library. Tom Hanchett wrote a beautiful book. It's got little snippets about the histories of the library. Andrew Carnegie had just given Charlotte a grant to construct a white public library, and in order to justify barring black citizens from the new structure, city aldermen allocated a modest sum to build a separate black building. That happened in 1904. What I love about the Main Library is it's open to everyone now, and anyone with a library card can take advantage of the rich resources it offers. So long, old Maine, I can't wait. I'm saying goodbye to an old friend. I'll see you soon. Bye.
Landis Wade here, reading from the Christmas Redemption, the third book in the Christmas Courtroom trilogy. It's a trilogy where lawyers save Christmas, kind of a cross between My Cousin Vinny and Miracle on 34th Street. Protagonist Thad Raker and his wife who works with him, Sarah Kennedy, have teamed up in book 3 to represent the company who manufactured the reindeer hoverboard. There's a class action lawsuit going on. And in this scene, Tarina Winter, the president of that company, is being cross-examined by the plaintiff's lawyer, Robert Greenback. Robert Greenback became more aggressive. Insulting me is not a good idea. I'm sworn to tell the truth, Mr. Greenback. So that's the way you want to play it. I'm not here to play with you, sir. I can see you're not a very playful person. Raker made a note on his legal pad that said, remind client to be respectful, and then circled it. Greenback tossed a notepad onto the table. We'll come back to this topic later. Tell me about your company. It will come in handy when I get the judgment that puts you out of business. Tarina Winter ignored the jab. What do you want to know? She asked. Well, for starters, who owns it? I have a 50-50 partner. His name? Next question, Tarina said. One that has something to do with the lawsuit. Greenback slammed his fist on the table, causing Raker's papers to scatter and the water in his glass to swirl. He shouted at Raker, do we have to go to the judge about this behavior? Raker remained calm, picked up his glass, and took a sip of water. Perhaps we should. I can let the judge know you lost your temper and tried to break my table. On the other hand, it would be quicker if you just laid a foundation for your question. Fine, Greenback said. Miss Winter, was your partner involved in overseeing the manufacture of the computer chip? No. You're not going to tell me his name? No, and it's not a he. Honestly, what makes men think that two women can't own a successful business? Greenback didn't apologize. Let's focus on the business itself. Headquarters, Greenland. Manufacturing plants, U.S., UK, Italy, and Argentina. Where was the computer chip made? Greenland. Who designed the chip? You're looking at her. Now we're getting somewhere, Greenback said. Tarina Winter brushed some lint from her sweater. It took you long enough. Greenback leaned back. Are you always this difficult? Not always, but when my time is taken up by men like you who spend their time blaming others for a chance to get a large fee, then yes, I can prove to be difficult. Are you saying your company is not at fault for the failure of the hoverboard to fly? Yes. Can you prove it? Mr. Greenback, I watched enough courtroom television to know that the proving part belongs to you. You're an arrogant woman. Aren't we a match? Fine, Greenback said. We'll do this slowly, one fingernail at a time. The reindeer hoverboard failed to fly for 75% of the adults who bought it, correct? That's true for those 75%. Whose fault was it? Theirs. I don't understand. I didn't expect you would. Greenback eyed Tarina Winter with jaw-clenched contempt. Why was it their fault? They didn't heed the warning label. Greenback took out a document marked as Exhibit 1 and laid it in front of the witness. This is the warning label. Would you mind reading it into the record? Not at all. Winter took out her glasses, placed them on her nose, and tucked the stems over her ears. Then she read, Warning, this product works for true believers only. How do my clients ignore the warning label? Greenback asked. Come now, Mr. Greenback, you can figure this out. He picked up the exhibit and looked closely at the warning label. What exactly is a true believer? Ah, that's the best question you've asked today. She turned to Thad Raker. Mr. Raker, would you like to tell him? Greenback was impatient. What's she talking about? Raker swallowed a smile and looked Greenback in the eye. A true believer is an adult who believes in Santa Claus. Silence. Is this some kind of joke? I'm not joking, Raker said. Greenback looked back at Tarina Winter. Are you telling me this case has something to do with whether my clients believe in Santa Claus? Tarina Winter sat up straight and brushed another strand of silver gray hair from her left eye. Welcome to my world, Mr. Greenback. Thank you, Main Library, for the opportunity to read from my book, The Christmas Redemption, the third in the Christmas Courtroom Trilogy. Goodbye, Main Library.
I'm a big lover of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library. To say goodbye to the old main branch and to celebrate construction on the new branch, I've been challenged to read a passage from one of my favorite books. I chose The Good Sister by Sally Hepworth. When we were 5, my mom took my sister Rose and me to the library every day for a year. A better education than school will ever give you, Mom used to say, and I quite agree. If it were up to me, every child would have a year in the library before they went to school, not just to read, but to roam, to befriend a librarian.
Hey there, I'm Landis Wade, author of the book, The Legally Binding Christmas. It is the second book in the Christmas Courtroom Trilogy. It's about lawyers being faced with clients who think they work for Santa Claus and having to save Christmas. This is a little scene early in the book when Thad Raker, the protagonist and hero in the first book, a lawyer by trade, meets his client that takes him on an adventure in book 2. Raker put on his jacket and walked to meet the person behind the voice. He found an elderly man about 5 feet 10 inches tall, with fine gray hair pulled around his ears and tied in a tight ponytail. He wore black slacks, a blue shirt, and a red vest under a tweed jacket. His face was full with bushy brows and a prominent nose. It was a cheerful mug, with laugh lines like lightning strikes on either side of his mouth. He smiled when he saw Raker. There was something about the man that Raker liked right away. You must be Mr. Masters. Raker held out his hand. The name is T.W. Masters, but everyone calls me Twirly. Don't know why, they just do. Guess it's because my parents gave me the nickname. Yep, that must be why they do it. On the other hand, maybe they do it because I talk a lot and it sounds like I'm going in circles. Or maybe they do it because when I was a child I took a ride in a helicopter. What a ride. Do you like rides in helicopters? No. Anyway, Twirly's my name. Yours is Thad Raker, right? As the man talked, Raker sensed this meeting was going to be a waste of time. But he did the courteous thing, inviting Masters into his office and offering a seat. Raker took the chair behind his desk. Should we get the reindeer test out of the way? Masters asked. Raker was surprised. How did Twirly Masters know about the reindeer test? Raker developed the test because of the notoriety that followed the trial of the century. During the first 6 months after the trial, Raker received at least 2 calls a week from people who claimed to have some connection to Santa Claus. Most of them were criminal defendants calling from the jail. They wanted the lawyer who got the guy off by proving he worked for Santa Claus. Any lawyer who could do that was a lawyer for them, and that's why Raker came up with the reindeer test. Name the 8 reindeer, he would say. The most interesting lies Raker heard in his career came from potential clients who had taken the reindeer test. He remembered one guy who, without hesitation, used the last names of the top 8 players from his fantasy football team. Another guy named 7 planets and Rudolph. Another tried vegetables, among them kale, butterbean, and turnip. One finished up with the names of presidents on Washington, on Lincoln, on Kennedy, and Reagan. For the first 4 years, Raker agreed to represent anyone who passed the reindeer test, partly because they sounded sincere and partly because Raker wanted to believe in their stories. But he finally had to admit that he was being too gullible. When he discovered that the clients who passed the test were either frauds or needed psychiatric help, he politely withdrew from their cases. Only once did the blinders stay on too long. It was the Patton case, and like the trial of the century, it made the news. How about it? Twirly Masters broke into Raker's thoughts again. Do you want me to take the reindeer test? It's not a problem. Matter of fact, I can do it in reverse. Excuse me? Know them so well I can do it backward. That won't be necessary. Don't mind a bit. On Blitzen, on Donner, on Cupid and Comet. Now Vixen, now Prancer, now Dancer, now Dasher. That was... I'm not through yet. Don't forget Rudolph. And then there's Olive. There's no reindeer named Olive, Mr. Masters. Sure there is, he said. Just sing the song. He's Olive the other reindeer, the one who used to laugh and call Rudolph names. Raker was about to smile when he remembered how tiring it had been to deal with eccentric clients who came to him only because of his success in the Edmonds case. How'd you find me, Mr. Masters? When you called, you said you knew someone involved in the case against Mr. Edmonds. Please call me Twirly. All my friends do, and I want you to be my friend. After all, we have so much in common, and... Raker cut him off. I don't mean to be rude, but I have a busy schedule. The question is part of my due diligence in deciding whether to represent you. Due diligence. I like that phrase. In layman's terms, doesn't it mean to check things out, be careful, turn over every stone, look before you leap, and that type of thing? Am I right? Sure I am. You can't be too careful, can you? No, you can't. Raker thought he'd been careful enough when he'd agreed to meet with Twirly Masters. So who do you know from the trial? Is it Judy Robertson? Judy had been the prosecution's main witness from the county tax department. She'd been a good friend of Raker after the trial, even more so after Elizabeth's death. No, it wasn't Mr. Robertson, and it wasn't the prosecutor, Jason Peabody, the one she married either. Do you know someone in law enforcement? Was it the police officer? Masters laughed. No, it wasn't the police officer. Well, if it wasn't Robertson, Peabody, or the police officer, who was it? Then Raker had an idea. Was it the woman who witnessed the scene at the Tipsy Tavern? No, it wasn't Shelley Barker. Then how do you know her name? I know a lot about that trial. Thanks so much, Main Library. Goodbye, Main Library.
Hi, I'm Laura King Edwards, and I'm going to be reading from Run to the Light. Taylor took her fading vision in stride. It was harder for me to accept my sister's failing eyesight and the more serious problems it foreshadowed. I didn't understand death then, and years later, I'm still not sure that I do. John had to pull me away from my laptop the night the Batten Disease Association added my sister to its online gallery of affected children. I scrolled through the pages of faces and names and hometowns and disease types and dates of birth and for many dates of death until my chest burned and my head pounded and my eyes felt heavy with hot tears. The next night, I dragged myself off the living room sofa at a commercial break to rinse dinner dishes at the sink. John wandered into the kitchen and found me curled up on the cold tile, my back to the dishwasher, my shoulders shaking, the dish rag on the floor forgotten. I wasn't the only one who found it difficult most of the time and impossible some of the time to forge ahead into our new world with enthusiasm and grace. But Mom wasn't just devastated about Taylor's illness, she was angry. Not long after the diagnosis, Mom stood up and walked out of church smack in the middle of the sermon. She didn't hate God or even blame him for Taylor's illness, she told me afterward. She just didn't feel like praising him that day. The Batten Association staff had given us contact information for other families. Many offered helpful advice for our situation and the horrors yet to come. But grateful as she was, my mother rejected the recommendation of some fellow parents to tell Taylor everything, that she had a fatal disease and would never grow up. She refused to be labeled a Batten parent. I never asked to join this club, she'd say. Instead, she vowed to fight for her daughter's life, even as Google results and the city's best doctors and other affected families told her she was crazy to try.
I was in awe. In those early months, I couldn't match Mom stride for stride. Her grief fueled her fury. She wanted to punch Batten disease in the gut. I didn't know where she found the will to fight, but I never questioned her spirit. I understood enough about genetics to know how close I'd come to having Batten disease, and I knew I'd want her to wage a war for me, too. On one of Mom's fighting days, she placed a bulk order for hardcover copies of The Cure, a stunning account of how one man raised $100 million in an effort to save his children from another rare disorder. I was over for dinner the night the UPS delivery man left a box the size of a microwave on Mom and Dad's front doorstep. We heard the whine of the truck, the idling engine in front of the house, and a thump on the porch before the doorbell rang twice. Dad peered at Mom over his grilled chicken and green salad. His eyes looked tired. "Are you expecting a package?" "I ordered books for our steering committee," Mom said, as if we all knew what she was talking about. I set down my fork. "What steering committee?" Mom's eyes darted toward my sister, who was inspecting one of the fake gems on her bejeweled t-shirt. "You'll get an email later," she answered. The Cure, which inspired the movie Extraordinary Measures, tells the story of John Crowley's fight against a severe neuromuscular disorder called Pompe that affects his children. At the time of their diagnosis, Pompe had no cure and no treatment. Like Batten, there wasn't a surgery or magic pill or alternative treatment that could stand up to all the horrible things that come with Pompe. But Crowley refused to accept his children's death sentence. He quit his job, invested his life savings in a biotech startup, and went on a worldwide hunt for the scientist who could save Megan and Patrick's lives. After a long, hard-fought effort, Megan and Patrick received therapy and bucked every dire prediction. Several days after that box arrived on Mom's doorstep, she and her friends Martha and Stacy, like Mom, both past presidents of community groups such as the Junior League, assembled hand-picked women for lunch in Martha's living room. The faces around the room belonged to volunteer dynamos and business leaders, all close friends or contacts from Mom's life before Batten disease. Together, we made up the steering committee. I listened and watched as Mom declared war on Batten disease and urged the rest of us to join her on the battlefield. "The doctor said there's nothing we can do," she said, "but I'm not going down without a fight." Her voice cracked as she described our opponent, ticking off symptoms that crept into my sister's life and the awful ones yet to come. But her resolve never wavered. "Nothing about this will be easy. There's little being done for Batten disease. There aren't many kids like Taylor, but we have to start somewhere. Someone has to take a stand. And you know what? I believe." The others sat transfixed, their homemade egg salad and pimento cheese sandwiches forgotten. I watched and listened to this iron-willed woman who'd given me life, and I knew I'd follow her to the ends of the earth to save my sister. As Mom's last word, believe, hung in the air, a sudden breeze flew through the crimson and gold leaves that clung to the trees outside. I took a copy of The Cure and gave one to each of the volunteers huddled in the room. In that moment, Taylor's tale was born. Goodbye, Main Library.
Hi, I'm Lisa Williams Klein. I'm the author of 10 middle grade and YA books, and I'm very honored to be reading the beginning of one of my books, my most recent book, 1 Week of You, in honor of the new library. So my book is 1 Week of You, and here is the beginning of chapter 1. So here's how it happens. I'm standing outside Lakeside High after freshman cheerleading practice, waiting for my older brother, Ryan. I'm always one of the last to get home because Ryan is the last person to leave yearbook staff every day. And I'll always remember this. Some guy standing behind me is playing Skinny Love on his phone and singing along at the top of his lungs. He doesn't have a good voice at all. In fact, his voice is terrible, but he has an incredible amount of out-of-tune enthusiasm, and I can't help it. I turn around, smiling. It's Andy Masters. Andy Masters, the chief roving reporter for WLHS, the Lakeside Freshman Class Video News Program. Andy Masters, the clown prince of the 9th grade. Andy Masters, the exciting new guy who just moved to our lakeside town of Mooresville, North Carolina in January and is in my health class, but has never noticed me once. I'm a great singer, right? He says with a grin. Very enthusiastic, I agree, still with my ridiculous smile. Even having a short conversational exchange with him is enough to give me hives. Talking to him feels like plugging into an electromagnet. I turn back around, my face feeling hot, and my mind blanking about what to say next. Maybe nothing. Probably our exchange will be over. But no, Andy pokes me on the shoulder. I turn back around. Do I know you? He says. He's a skinny guy with so much energy it seems to fly from his fingertips and off the ends of his dark curls. It's like I'm being caught in a vortex. I feel like a searchlight has been turned on me. Lizzie Winston, we're in health class together. I sit 3 rows behind you. Has he not heard Miss Robinson call my name every day during attendance since class started 3 months ago? We are? Andy's green eyes are wide behind his wire-rimmed glasses. He has eyelashes a girl would die for. He seems knocked over by disbelief. We are. Well, then I'm definitely going to need your number. You are? He grabs his head as if he can't believe how obvious this is. Duh, in case I need to contact you about health homework. Oh, I burst out laughing. Do you think we're ever going to have health homework? Why can't I stop giggling? I give him my number. It's the first time a boy has ever asked. Thanks for listening, and goodbye, Main Library. Excited for the new one. Thanks very much. Bye.
Hi everyone, Linda Bouchard here, author of The Witches 3 Count on Me, a children's Halloween story that has been described as a cross between The Wizard of Oz and Where the Wild Things Are, and it's my pleasure to read it for you. My favorite Eve is here at last. It's Halloween tonight, full of candy, tricks, and costumes, and lots of spooky fright. But first I need to eat the peas awaiting on my plate. Instead, I tell my sister she is ghastly, but her pumpkin sure looks great. My mother says I told a fib that made my sister cry. She sends me to my room to think till I can tell her why. I'll play a trick on her, I think, and run off behind her back. I take a path through forest trees, twisted, burned, and black, and there I come upon a sight, 3 witches dancing round. I hide my frightened self behind a tree trunk near the ground. They dance a dance, a wild-eyed jig, indeed, a fearsome scene. It's their night, it's scare night. It's their Halloween. Around their green and skinny necks hang chains of dried out bones, and on each head so hideous, black hats and pointy cones. Creepy curly toes peek out from tiny tattered shoes. Twirling, shouting, shrieking, they holler high halloos. To my surprise, I see 6 eyes. In search through evening gloom, 6 eyes spin round and look for me beneath a rising moon. 6 eyes light up, and full of glee, they see their boyish gain. 6 eyes find me, I gasp and groan, and feel my spirit wane. Fast as flames, I spring right up. Watch me, I will flee. But before my daring dash begins, 3 witches circle me. A bitter wind rolls through the wood as one hisses to her coven. Looky, look, our guest is here, just perfect for our oven. She pulls me on her narrow broom, her voice a cackle loud. Rise up, forsake the earth, for sky and thundercloud. My fingers squeeze with all their might. We soar above the trees, swooping, sweeping, cross the sky like bats upon the breeze. The wind and mist are in my face. We hurtle through the night. I cannot see how high we fly. My eyes are squeezing tight. With a whooshy bump, we land at last onto the rocky ground. Where, oh, where are we, I ask, and slowly look around. The witch's hut stares back at me, adorned with webs and vine. If my mother searched for all her days, this place she'd never find. They toss me high and through the door into the witch's kitchen. Across a grimy floor I slide into the witch's kitchen. It's hot and steamy, full of smoke and things I shouldn't eat, like jars of bulging lizard eyes and cans of buzzard meat. In the middle, tall and scalding, a giant stove is burning. with a portly pot, just my size, boiling, belching, churning. This is where the witches three begin to use their power. It's clear that they loathe children on any day or hour. Around the bubbling pot go we, round and round we go. I duck and weave and zig and zag, but they finally corner me. I'm outnumbered 3-1, their figures looming tall. Just wait, I say, let's play a game. It's trick-or-treat time for us all. The witches three don't make a peep. They do not dance or sing. Have they heard the rumor? Quick trickery is my thing. We'll play my favorite counting game, a riddle it will be. No one yet has guessed it right. Can you, O witches three? Witches are not good at riddles. It's true, they just are not. This one is sure to save me from the boiling pot. And you are going to have to check this out at the library to find out how it ends. Thank you for listening. I'm Linda Bouchard, and I miss you already, Charlotte Mecklenburg Main Library.
Hey everyone, my name is Lenny Tran, and I am a lover of the Charlotte Mecklenburg Library. My favorite thing about the library is the Black Lives Matter initiative. Today I'd like to read a passage from my favorite book, The Library Book by Susan Orlean. I grew up in libraries, or at least it feels that way. Our visits to the library were never long enough for me. The place was so bountiful. I loved wandering around the bookshelves, scanning the spines until something happened to catch my eye. Those visits were dreamy, frictionless interludes that promised I would leave richer than when I arrived. It wasn't like going to a store with my mom, which guaranteed a tug of war between what I wanted and what my mother was willing to buy me. In the library, I could have anything I wanted. My mother always mentioned that if she could have chosen any profession at all, she would have chosen to be a librarian, and we would grow silent for a moment as we both considered what an amazing thing that would have been. As I say goodbye to Main Library and celebrate the construction of new Main Library, I'm challenging 3 friends to step into the story by sharing what they love about Charlotte Mecklenburg Library and reading from their favorite book.
Hi, I'm Maury Fitzwin, and I'm going to be reading from Take Heart, 26 Steps to a Healthy Homeschool. First day of school. I am not a huge proponent of homeschool mimicking public or private school. However, if there is a tried and true idea that works at home that originated in a public or private school, I say run with it. In public and private schools, the first and last day of school are generally filled with excitement, and I adopted this same philosophy for our school. Early on, I endeavored to make our first day of school unforgettable, one that the students would look forward to with much enthusiasm. I believe I succeeded when we started our 3rd year and our students began asking in July what we'll be doing for the first day of school in August. It was at this point I also decided they needed to take ownership of at least part of that day's events. I started asking them, beginning with the oldest, to give us suggestions and help us plan activities. It was such a joy to see how thrilled they became as they were included in decisions. Here's a list of our first day of school activities, for many of which we invited 1 or 2 other homeschool families to join us. Number 1, have a picnic with old-fashioned field day games. Number 2, decorate the classroom with posters and streamers and other fun elements. Number 3, scan family photos into banner paper or poster paper and make a welcome back to school banner. Number 4, do you have school colors? The first 3 days of school, we dressed in our school colors in celebration of school unity. Number 5, Plan and take a field trip that kicks off your first unit or major area of study. Number 6, have a family concert, whether you sing or play an instrument or dance. Number 7, celebrate staying up late one last weekend by having a special movie festival. Number 8, do something unexpected. One year, we all dyed our hair blue. Spray on, wash off. Number 9, fix a special breakfast the weekend before school starts. Number 10, enjoy a backyard barbecue. Celebrate the start of a brand new school year and forget about the difficult end to last year's school. Create momentum for starting school by planning a special day. Goodbye, Main Library.
Hi, this is Peter Schmidt from Miami, Florida, and I'll be reading 3 poems from my collection Goodbye Apostrophe from Regal House Publishing. The first poem is called History. On a walking tour of historic homes in my old neighborhood, we enter a house that slowly dawns on me as belonging to the family of a girl I knew in junior high. Good-looking, intelligent, vivacious, and popular, and who died suddenly, not much after, in college, of a heart condition never diagnosed. She was editor of our 9th grade yearbook, so it's no surprise she's everywhere in it. And in my copy, she signed each photo, crossing out in one her face and writing, "I hate this picture." That year she dated a black classmate, when at the time not one black family lived anywhere in our town. And now I am walking through her old house, which I had never visited back then, just a boy from school, and into her bedroom, which her parents have evidently left as she might have last seen it. The lone twin bed, the Frampton posters, cramped desk, box turntable. Our guide is pointing something out, but I'm not listening, for just now I am closer to her than I ever was, and am learning another kind of history of this house. Downstairs again, I introduce myself to her mother, who has been patiently waiting with a pitcher of lemonade for us to file through. She smiles and claims to remember my name. Next to the door hangs a large family photo with Beth standing front and center, her gaze directed just above the camera, taken likely not long before she died. I pause there briefly, and we resume our leisurely tour as our guide draws a line across his list of houses. This next one is called Typos. It's a sonnet. I urge my students to watch for typos. How do I know that you meant tap dancer when I'm staring hard at a lap dancer? And you're performing an asked for lipo on the great and ancient Chinese poet is unintentional, I'm sure, but lacks respect all the same. Pubic goes public too often these days. To what do we owe it? Loins are lions when the mood's conducive, and immoral, yes, has proved immortal since probably time immemorial. But your paper's not the place to prove it. Did old poets write with rhyme and meaner, or with a more cheerful misdemeanor? And I'll conclude with the title poem, Goodbye Apostrophe. Goodbye Apostrophe, you are barely hanging on at the top of the line by one curled fingertip, and now it appears you've fallen from the keypads of all the smartest phones. Forgive my possessiveness toward you. Goodbye, turn signal, hiding behind the steering wheel, whatever indestructible composite you're made of. No one in this town seems to need you anymore. I don't know which way to go without you. Goodbye, incandescent light bulb. You took up all my energy, but these sinuous newcomers lack your warmth, your hominess. When the rare idea comes to me now, what flashes on above my head? Goodbye, Mom. When I went to pick up your ashes today, a squirrel darted beneath my car, then came out the other side, unscathed, as if there weren't room in the world for one more death, however small. My light, my direction, mine. Goodbye. And from goodbye apostrophe, goodbye main library, and thank you.
This is Renee Winchester, passionate about literacy and strong supporter of libraries everywhere. And today I'm going to read from Outbound Train. The people of Bryson City didn't need an alarm clock to signal the start of another day. Norfolk Southern provided one each morning. 3 engines passed through town, the midnight, 3:30, and 5:30 rails. In the darkness, the train sounded alike, a rhythmic clack of steel against steel, the roar increasing with each engine as it pushed through the darkness, followed by the sound of a whistle piercing the night, blowing 2 short toots, then one longer howl, warning anyone who might be out after dark, and there weren't many, to clear the tracks. Beneath a blanket of darkness, Bryson City seemed peaceful. Some Milltown occupants slumbered in houses they rent but would never own. Others slept in trailers set up on blocks with the wheels removed and sold for extra money. Hard-working people slept soundly until the first train clacked into town. Then they stirred, but not to the point of fully waking. They continued this half-sleep while the second train sounded its horn until finally their train, the 5:30, sounded. The 5:30, whose engineer kindly held the chain longer than the other 2 previous men, converted the warning whistle into a town-wide wake-up call. One long wake-the-dead scream for those who were so dog-tired they could barely face the morning. It was then that the good people of Bryson City arose and blindly measured 3 scoops of JFG coffee for their machines. Some lit a cigarette and sat hypnotized as pitch-black coffee sprang to life in the percolator bulb. They removed bits of tobacco from the tips of their tongue while the aroma of liquid sunshine escaped through cracks in the walls. A new day dawned, and for some, but not many, they dreamed of life beyond the one-stop sign town. Goodbye, Main Library, and thank you for everything.
Hi, my name is Rosie Crumpton, and I'm the author of All I Left Unsaid, A Latina's Journey Toward Truth. My book was also published in Spanish, Todo lo que callé, El viaje de una latina hacia la verdad, and today I'm going to read you a short excerpt in both languages. My book, it's an award-winning book. It was awarded 5 stars by Reader's Favorite. It is a coming-of-age novel based on true events. And so here goes. Chapter 1, April 16th. Months after the 6 of us should have moved out of the Newberry Road home, I still stared at the unpacked boxes lined up in my bedroom closet. The boxes were a reminder to me of how close we came to leaving once and for all. What hurt most is that I really believed it this time. The rest of you had already unpacked and settled back in, but I didn't mind rummaging through the boxes to get to my things every day. This was only temporary for me. I was going to leave one day. The 6 of us had plans to move into a 2-bedroom apartment not far from the Newberry Roadhouse on April 16th. You all would still go to the same school. We didn't want to disrupt your life too terribly if we could help it. The 4 of you knew of our plan to leave. For you all, it only took months, but for me, it took years. Before the 6 of us deliberately arranged to move out, I had all intentions of moving out of that house, far away from him, as soon as I could. I was a college graduate and could afford a place of my own. It seemed like the American thing to do. But when I told Mommy of my plans to leave, she couldn't understand it. Same excerpt in Spanish. 16 de abril. Meses después de que nosotros 6 nos mudáramos de la casa localizada en la calle Newberry, todavía miraba fijamente a las cajas alienadas en el armario de mi habitación medio desempacadas. Las cajas me recordaban lo cerca que estuvimos de irnos de una vez por todas y para siempre. Lo que más me dolía es que esta vez me lo creí de verdad. El resto de ustedes ya habían desempacado y se habían instalado en la casa, pero a mí no me importaba hurgar en las cajas para ver lo que necesitaba cada día. Esto solo era algo temporal para mí. Algún día me iba a ir. Los 6 teníamos planes de mudarnos a un apartamento de 2 habitaciones cerca de la casa de la calle Newberry el 16 de abril. Todos ustedes seguirían yendo a la misma escuela y no queríamos interrumpir demasiado sus vidas si podíamos evitarlo. Los 4 sabían de nuestro plan de irnos. Para todos ustedes solo tomó meses, pero para mí tomó años. Antes de que nosotros 6 acordáramos mudarnos de manera premeditada, tenía todas las intenciones de mudarme de esa casa lejos de él, y lo antes posible. Era una mujer licenciada de la universidad y podía permitirme mi propio lugar. Parecía lo más americano posible, pero cuando le conté a Mami mis planes de irme, ella no podía entenderlo. Thanks for listening. Goodbye, Main Library.
Hello, my name is Carla Holloway, and I'm going to be reading from my most recent novel, Gone Missing in Harlem. Chapter 1. My baby gone? Baby Chloe was alone for a snatch of a moment, which some said was just long enough for exactly that, when her mother went inside Chasen's grocery to pay for the apples she'd selected from the front window bin. It was mid-autumn. Some leaves had already turned, distancing themselves from summer's green. A quiet morning light scattered through the leafy filter of the chestnut's canopy and unabashedly took up the gilded promise of the season's colors. Despite the disarray to come, the day would be brisk and bright. Somebody, likely the boy Chasen hired to do toting from the basement storage, had meticulously stacked the apples into a golden, then green, and then deep crimson that rose to a peak right under the window. A mix of other produce, pears, carrots, and potatoes, red and yellow onions both, latticed baskets of tomatoes still attached to their tangle of vines, lay in a haphazard scatter across a hodgepodge of wooden crates. Only the apples were arranged, daring someone to break into the rising display. Selma Mosby did exactly that. With each grasp of the round, firm fruit, she got closer to her memory of skillet-fried apples simmered down into a buttery sweet nectar that more than enough vanilla and nutmeg and cinnamon sprinkled through. Selma thought that if she repeated her childhood memory exactly right, she might come closer to being cherished like her brother Junebug had been. She had the moment fully fleshed out in what was left of her mind when she tried to maneuver the baby's flashy modern pram into the grocery, but its wide wheel carriage couldn't make it down the aisle, so she backed the buggy out of the door and left it lined up against the bin that held the yams. It wouldn't take long to ring up the apples and pull some stick cinnamon from the counter jar. She wouldn't be gone for more than a minute, and that much was correct. Selma was gone for not long at all. But the same would not be true for baby Chloe. The not much older than a girl her own self left her daughter's carriage outside and stepped into the small neighborhood gathered inside Chasen's. She didn't notice the white man on the corner leaned up against the street lamp, pretending to read a folded newspaper. A burlap sack was rolled and tucked up under his arm. He was probably no older than 30, even though his pockmarked cheeks made him look older. He had tortoise-shelled horn rims and wore a brown fedora, and more often than looking down at the paper, he looked up and around, surveying the street and especially watching the grocery store on the corner. Selma needed to be her mama's baby girl again, so she wasn't paying her one bit of attention when Mrs. Ada Chasen followed her out in order to get a peek at her newborn. The grocer's wife watched while Selma bent over to place the brown paper bag into the pram. Neither of them stopped to notice the street's unusual quiet. Even the white man had disappeared from his vigil at the lamppost. Selma laid the lumpy bag right on the baby's blanket, folding the top over on itself so the apples wouldn't tumble out. But it wouldn't have mattered if they had. There was nothing else there. No not yet turned dusky-cheeked child, no grasping fingers baby, no rose-lipped infant. With Mrs. Chasen standing right next to her, trying desperately to understand why she saw nothing in the buggy but a bulging brown paper bag full of apples, Selma looked up and then over at the elderly woman, and finally took in her worried look. She twisted sharply from one side to the other, and not seeing what she expected, took in some air, the last full and deep and deliberate breath she remembered, and said what she did. Mrs. Chasen's wail nearly drowned out Selma's soft questions. "Is," she whispered her confusion, "my baby gone? My baby gone missing?" Goodbye, Main Library.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Archer and I'm going to be reading a passage from my novel, The Plus One. Eventually, she turned off the 3D printer, connected up the last wires, and dressed her robot. He even made the cheap slacks and button-down she had picked up at Target look tony rather than plain. But the thing of beauty was still just a thing. The shapely jaw was slack, the bright eyes dull. It was time to Frankenstein him. Kelly knew the software was all essentially in place, most of it designed by herself, but it was still in the testing stage and hadn't been fully run yet. Her focus had been on conducting the social research necessary to determine how an android should interact with users, not yet on programming in those interactions and traits. She would have to make some tweaks and improvise as she went, but even then, it might not work. She feared she could very well end up with a Swahili-speaking pedophile with Tourette's. Kelly ran some simulations on one of the lab's computers, making minor changes, gaining a cautious confidence as she went. It wasn't until it was time to make her programming selections that she realized that she had the opportunity to create her ideal man. She had already made him physically perfect, so why not do the same cognitively? But defining perfection in terms of mind, of heart, of personality was a much trickier proposition. Then inspiration struck and she almost laughed aloud. Of course, she had already designed her ideal mate. She accessed her list of requirements from the dating site and went to work, elaborating and fleshing out the profile as she programmed. A man should know how to tie a tie, change a tire, and train a dog. He needed to speak English, of course, and let's throw in Italian, and Mandarin is important. Oh, what the heck, she didn't have all day. She gave him access to all of Google. She knew she was taking a risk in making this man so extraordinary, but she didn't have time to cherry pick, and frankly, she didn't want to. The more Kelly programmed, the less she was making a man, a breathing biped who could stand next to her in photos, and the more she was making her man. She imported the rudimentary responses to social cues she had been developing, but worried there were holes there. She'd been responding to social cues for 29 years and still hadn't figured it out. She brushed the thought aside. This would have to do. She'd rely on his machine learning capabilities to fill in the gaps as they went. The essential thing was to ensure he was entirely under her control. give herself the ability to reprogram him, to turn him off and on, to mitigate as much as possible the crazy factor of what she was doing. She ensured that she could access his system from her own laptop so that she could make changes as necessary at home. And as an analog backup, she fitted a panel in his lower back with a set of switches, fundamentals like on, off, and sleep mode, just in case. With everything that could go wrong with this plan, it was reassuring to feel that physical manifestation of control under her fingers. And finally, it was done. Or rather, he. Tingling, exhilarated, Kelly flipped the on switch, and stirring into life in front of her was the most amazing man she'd ever seen. He looked around the room a little, gaining his surroundings, but when his eyes found Kelly, they stopped. He smiled. "Hi, Kelly," he said. Thanks, everyone, and goodbye to the main library.
I will be reading from my novel, Bells for Eli. I'm Susan Zarenda. Some people can retain early memories, but for me, this is not true. For me, the day of the marigolds is my only detailed memory during the year when I was just over midway to my 4th birthday. I was patting dirt around a seedling while Mama held the fragile stalk steady when a loud and alarming cry shook us from our task. We looked up to see Pot, he'd been working in the yard, run from the side of the Winfield house with Eli in his arms. Mary Lily stood on the front porch watering ferns, and I watched her wide skirt fan out into a circle as she nearly stumbled in her haste down the white wooden steps toward Pot. Her straw hat flopped down low over her forehead. Mama pulled off her gardening gloves, and I tried to dash across the street, but she caught me. "No, Delia," she said. Her hands were tight on my shoulders. "Something's wrong with Eli," I wailed. "Whatever it is, we don't need to hamper them," she said. My mother shoved the new gardening gloves into the waistband of her blue check pedal pushers. I liked seeing my mother relaxed in her pedal pushers because in those days she nearly always wore a dress. Mama took my hand. Hers was damp. Together we hurried to the edge of our front yard, close enough to hear, but we did not cross the street. Pot had caught up to Mary Lily at the bottom of the steps. We were in hearing range, but he talked so fast I had to grasp at phrases. Pot Hawkins works for the Winfields, but to say he's their gardener hardly begins to identify his place in their world. His family has been connected to Mary Lily's maybe since the end of slavery. All I know is he and his mother Caro have lived in their little house out in the country on Lauderdale land all my life. "That red devil lie in the Coca-Cola bottle Mr. Jean done left on the back stoop," I heard him say, "for them balloons." And then, for a while, I could not follow the words until I heard, "Mr. Eli drunk some of it." I heard Eli breathing, even from across the street. I thought he was choking because his face was contorted, his cheeks sucking in. "My God, oh God, help me, Pot. Get Ellison into the house. Milk, he needs milk," Mary Lily screamed. My mother began to run toward our house, pulling me by the hand. "What is Red Devil Lie?" I sputtered as I slipped and staggered alongside her, trying to keep my arm in its socket, but she didn't answer. Inside the house she made a call, and I heard her say the name of our street. Then she sat with her head in her hands. "What is Red Devil Lie?" I asked again. "It cleans drains, but my brother must have been using it to blow up balloons for the party." "Did Uncle Gene hurt Eli?" I asked. "I'm sorry, baby," she said, and smoothed my hair. "I can't explain it. I have to be quiet and think what to do." She picked up a pencil and paper and began to write. The next thing I remember was the deafening shriek of the ambulance siren and Mama jolting from her chair. Again, she grabbed my hand and began to run. I kept up better this time, and unlike before, we crossed the street, yet we stood back, waiting. I watched terrified as 2 men in white waist-length coats brought Eli out on a stretcher. His arms bent in at the elbows and stuck out like wings. I saw his mouth opening and closing, and then he vomited on himself. I heard him heaving. One of the men took the bottom of the sheet covering Eli and wiped away the yellow spew. Mary Lily hurried behind the stretcher, but before she climbed into the ambulance, she looked toward Mama. She was crying while she talked. "Call Dr. Crawford and tell him we are on our way to the hospital in Columbia, not Green Branch." As a child, I loved our doctor, but I feared him too, for visits to his office often resulted in a painful shot of penicillin. Even with a temperature of 103 degrees and a throat so swollen with pus I could hardly swallow without tears, I was never so sick that I didn't dread the needle burning into my hip. So at the mention of Dr. Crawford, I knew Eli must be very sick. The ambulance turned on its siren again and pulled away from the curb. Mary Lily and Pot and Eli were all inside. Suddenly the vehicle stopped and Mary Lily opened the back door and leaned out, calling to Mama, "Dear God, Jeanette, find Gene, tell him." And then the ambulance was gone, carrying Eli away in a loud blur of wheels and warning bells. Goodbye, Main Library.
Hi, my name is Mark DeCastrick, and I'm going to be reading from my latest Sam Blackman mystery, Fatal Scores. If it wasn't for baseball, I'd be in either the penitentiary or the cemetery. Babe Ruth. Chapter 1. There's no place where a beer tastes better than at a baseball game. Attorney Hewitt Donaldson made the proclamation over his shoulder as he juggled a hot dog and an oversized plastic cup of brew. I followed him down the crowded stadium aisle, trying to balance a beer and a hot dog of my own without missing a step. Sliding into home plate is acceptable. Sliding into a cluster of unsuspecting fans is not. The Saturday afternoon in early April offered a cool breeze and clear blue sky, the perfect weather for the opening day of the Asheville tourists' new season. Attendance at picturesque McCormick Field promised to be a sellout with free T-shirts and half-price beer and hot dogs. Excuse us, Hewitt made the apologies as he plowed his way through the feet and knees of those already seated in the front row behind home plate. Without a free hand, he had to collapse into his seat, sloshing beer onto his green and orange Hawaiian shirt. I laid my hot dog across the top of the cup, grabbed the blue armrest to take the weight off my prosthetic leg, and eased myself down. Nicely done, young man. I twisted in my seat to see an older gentleman directly behind Hewitt. He wore a yellow and white golf shirt, sharply creased slacks, and a visor that left his bald head exposed. He looked like he'd arrived straight from the country club. He shifted his gaze to Hewitt. Unlike your companion, who landed like a beached whale. Is that the way to treat your guest? Hewitt said without bothering to turn around. The older man laughed. I apologize. I shouldn't have disparaged a whale like that. He offered me his hand. The grip was firm. I'm Ted Kirkpatrick. Sam Blackman. Ah, the famous private detective. Well, I'm far from famous. Kirkpatrick looked to his left and then his right, surveying the crowd. Not if we limit it to Asheville. Hewitt chimed in through a mouthful of hot dog. He'd still come in behind Nikayla. That's your partner, right? Yes, I said. She gave me Saturday afternoon off. To hang out with this hippie troublemaker? Kirkpatrick patted Hewitt on the shoulder. The description fit. Hewitt's shoulder-length gray hair, the loud shirt, frayed jeans, and sandals typed him more as an ancient street musician or jewelry artisan than Asheville's premier defense attorney. A little north of 70, Hewitt was as fierce a trial lawyer as I'd ever known. During my years in the Army as a chief warrant officer, I'd not crossed paths with a jag any tougher. And who are you hanging out with? Hewitt asked. Or couldn't you get someone to sit beside you? Like me, Hewitt had noticed an empty seat on either side of Kirkpatrick. Obviously, word got out that I'd given you 2 free tickets. I realized Hewitt's invitation to me had come at no cost to himself. Although the banter between the two men was good-natured, I wanted to make sure I thanked my true host. These are terrific seats, Mr. Kirkpatrick. It's Ted, please. I'm not quite as old as Methuselah here. Hewitt, how was that game in 1925? Hewitt swallowed a large gulp of beer without comment. What game? I asked. The one Babe Ruth was supposed to play in. That's the tie-in to the Luminaries Festival. A connection clicked in my brain. The festival's honorees. Ruth is one of them. Kirkpatrick nodded. 95 years ago, Babe was supposed to be in this park for an exhibition game, but he drank so much beer and ate so many hot dogs on the train ride from Knoxville that he collapsed in the Asheville depot. Kirkpatrick lightly knocked Hewitt on the back of the head with his knuckles. You hear that, Hewitt? Too much beer and too many hot dogs. No such thing, Hewitt muttered and kept eating. What happened? I asked. They managed to get him to the Battery Park Hotel. The rumor spread through the reporters that Ruth had died. For 24 hours, Babe Ruth was declared dead in Asheville. The town was suddenly famous around the globe. Then the facts caught up with the furor, and one reporter labeled the whole incident the bellyache heard round the world. Goodbye, Main Library.
Hi, I'm Michael Amos Cody. This is my novel, Gabriel's Songbook. I'm going to read just the opening of the first chapter titled The Dead of Night. He wrecked around midnight on the winding Rocky Bluff section of North Carolina Highway 209A. The narrow blacktop lay dusty in one particular curve where the guardrail happened to be down due to construction. A witness following him through the fog and dust and darkness said the car didn't jerk or swerve before it vaulted off the mountain road. It just kept straight when it should have turned, and then disappeared into the tops of the pines that cling to the mountain's side. The only thing the sheriff and paramedics found in one piece was his Martin guitar. Less than 48 hours later, a three-legged stand of weathered gray tobacco sticks stood at the head of the mauve casket. On the stand, a burlap heart, straw-stuffed and twine-tied and frilled with sprays of dried wildflowers, framed a picture of Theodore James smiling and holding that guitar. More than 300 floral arrangements, created in a flurry by the Posy Patch, lined the walls and swelled toward the ceiling behind the casket, their soft blues and reds, gentle yellows and purples and greens blanched by the fluorescent lights overhead. 239 people signed the guest book by the door at the back of Ramsey's Chapel. Then, in a solemn, shuffling line, they passed by the flowers and the casket. At the smiling picture, the line turned sharply on itself, and everybody stopped to give teary or stony condolences to Aunt Myrtle and Bobby James and the rest of the family standing by the front pew. Delbert Gunter brought up the end of this mourning line. Fiddle and bow passed together from left hand to right and back, while he fussed with the faded blue galluses that crossed his shoulders. Then he stood still and looked down at the body for a few breaths. The room faded into silence. He rubbed the belly of his overalls and turned from the casket. His glistening blue gaze fell to the row of Sunday-go-to-meeting shoes on the floor in front of the first pew, and he took the bow in his right hand and with a flick of the other wrist held the fiddle cradled on his left forearm. Aunt Myrtle reached for a fresh tissue. The old fiddler touched bow to string, and a variation of an old mountain melody cried for a moment before he hushed it with whispered lyrics he'd written himself, Uncle T's favorite song. Mama serves biscuits and gravy at sunrise, and coffee to open our eyes. The frost is a-coming, the gathering begins, and you're missing harvest again. Goodbye, Main Library.
Hello everyone, my name is Paula Martinack. I'm going to read to you from my novel, my most recent novel, which is called Testimony. Here's the cover. And what you need to know is it's a historical novel. It's set in 1960 at a women's college in rural Virginia. The main character is named Jen Ryder. She's a history professor and a gay woman. And she has just found out that a gay male colleague was arrested in a police entrapment sweep. And this scene starts on the first day of classes in the fall semester. After her second class, Jen called Fenton in the theater, but he was skittish and said he couldn't talk. First day pandemonium, he claimed. He was the lone drama teacher at the college who also cast and directed all the school plays, managing students from both Baines and its brother college. Jen waited until she was packed up to head home, then dropped in at the theater to gauge for herself how her friend was holding up under the weight of the news about Mark. She tagged along behind him through the theater wings as he took inventory of props, that might suit for the fall production of Charlie's Aunt. He'd lost some weight since she'd last seen him. Slender to begin with, now his jacket hung off him loosely, like a teenager who had borrowed his father's clothes. "Hon, you don't want to be seen with me right now." He glanced around as if spies might be hiding in the scenery and props. "It's not safe." The fear she had when Ruby told her about Mark resurfaced as a catch in her throat. "Are you and Mark involved?" Fenton continued to inspect the props, making notes on his checklist, but she saw a flicker of pain in his hazel eyes. "No names, please." After a pause, he continued, "It's been over for a while." She waited, but he didn't elaborate. "Well, what say you come for barbecue on Saturday? We'll try to forget what's happening and have a gay old time." He winced at the word gay, but aloud, "I did miss barbecue all summer. Count me in." "You could bring me flowers," she suggested. "Everyone will think we finally fell in love." What they'll think is you finally lost your mind, given up all hope of finding a normal man." She lowered her voice. "Little do they know I only like abnormal men like you." He put down a china vase he'd been assessing and turned toward her with a pinched look. "Jen, you realize how serious this is." "I know." "They caught 5 men. They won't stop there." Fenton forced his trembling hand into his jacket pocket. "I had a nightmare about Mark last night. I told him so many times how risky his behavior was, parks and tea rooms and such. But did he listen? And it turns out he was doing it with a Negro behind Big Bow, for God's sake." She flinched at the dismissive mention of Mark's Negro lover. She never took Fenton for a bigot, but he was so upset this wasn't the time to press the issue. The town's venerable shrine to the Confederate dead featured the names of local soldiers engraved along its base, plus the battles they served in. It took its nickname Big Bow from the bronze statue mounted on the pedestal of an officer on a prancing horse, almost as majestic as Robert E. Lee on Monument Avenue in Richmond. "So you never—" "No, I always play it safe." She wasn't sure how safe it could be frequenting bars in Richmond, but she couldn't point that out with Fenton so distraught. "Sometimes I think gay girls have it easier," he said. "You don't have to meet up in bathrooms where the person in the next stall might be an undercover cop." Jen bristled. "Yeah, women have it so easy, being invisible to each other. Or we might risk everything coming onto a colleague who turns out to be horrified by our very existence. Or some girl we teach could get angry about her grade and— Touché." Fenton sighed and scratched something off in his notes. "Thank God you've got Carolyn. That must be a comfort." She blurted out the barest facts of their breakup, while they perched on an uncomfortable wrought-iron chairs with tags that read, "Ernest, Spring '59, props from an Oscar Wilde production that had drawn huge crowds." "I truly don't know what to say." Fenton rubbed the palm of her hand in a soothing way. "Except that I never much liked her." Jen stiffened. "You barely knew her." "That's right, she never deigned to come to you, always making you travel to her, selfish and self-centered if you ask me." "It was my choice," Jen said. "Richmond was safer for us than a town where everybody knows everybody's business." "Still, I saw her maybe twice in what, 5 years?" 6, which gave you plenty of time to let me know what you really thought of her, friend." "I couldn't tell you the truth. You were so much in love." Jen let go of the anger that had flared in her. Many times she'd kept her opinions close to the vest, with friends like Fenton, too. "Love," she said, with a shrug. "That's something I won't be rushing back into." Thank you, and goodbye, Main Library.
Hi, I'm Ms. Johnson, the media specialist at West Charlotte High School. The public library branch that I love using is the newly named Allegra Westbrook branch because it is the closest to West Charlotte. My favorite book growing up is Caldecott Award winner Where the Wild Things Are by Maurice Sendak. So I will read just a super quick part of it. "And now," cried Max, "let the wild rumpus start." And I always love this part because my mom and I would pretend like we were having a wild rumpus pajama party while she was reading this to me going to bed. I'm really gonna miss the old Maine library branch, and I can't wait to see the new one. Goodbye, Maine.
Hi, I'm Kathy Pickens, and I'm going to be reading from my book, Charlotte True Crime Stories, from History Press. Statistics or stories? Charlotte has always kept an eye on its place on the national stage, while at the same time maintaining its sense of humor. Typically, civic leaders only talk about crime in its absence, but in a 1940 Charlotte News editorial, the writer took the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover personally to task for snubbing Charlotte and robbing it of its honors as the nation's murder capital that year, beating out Atlanta, quote, its ancient rival for first honors, end quote. As we recall it, pointed out the editorial writer with tongue poked into his cheek, the town was at least 7 times as murderous as Chicago and 10 times as murderous as New York. Yet the annual FBI crime statistics reported that year gave neither, quote, hide nor hair of mention of Charlotte. We couldn't believe our eyes, end quote. Putting the blame firmly on Hoover's desk, the editor wrote, the man not only has no feeling for the proper pride of a city, he has no sense of drama either. Charlotte has always enjoyed a proper pride and a dash of drama. The region has historically been a safe, pleasant place to live, but has had its moments in the national crime spotlight and was once dubbed Little Chicago in a 1961 Charlotte News headline. I can't claim to be from Charlotte. I moved from South Carolina Hill Country in the early 1980s. And where I come from, you're not from there unless you were born in that place. Charlotte lacked that insularity and still welcomes travelers at its crossroads. Interlopers like me now outnumber the natives. Though I'll always feel my newcomer status, I've spent decades here with a raconteur's respect for the power stories have to reveal things about a place and its people. The following cases are that for me in this book. Though Charlotte is officially a big city, it still has its small town roots, and those who are missed or murdered may seem like someone we know in that intimate, small town way of knowing and caring. They are part of Charlotte, and those who listen for the city's stories feel their loss. Thank you, Charlotte Library, for providing us with all kinds of stories, and goodbye, Maine Library. We look forward to seeing you soon.
Hi, this is Chris Arvidsson. I'm going to read from my book, The Love of Baseball, Essays by Lifelong Fans. Then I got the word. The tickets were mine. I had a bag already packed. I raced to the airport and got a cheapo People's Express flight to Detroit through Newark from National Airport. But there was one more hitch to the whole thing. I had to get to the Renaissance Center in downtown Detroit by 4 p.m. to get the tickets from Major League Baseball's chief lobbyist. If I didn't get there in time, he was going to give them away to somebody else. Of course, the lines were long at the airports, the planes were late, Newark was a nightmare, and the People's Express cheapo flight staff, the few who actually seemed to be working there, were casual about actually boarding and leaving and arriving on time. When I got to Detroit's airport, I ran all the way through it and out to the curb and got in a cab and leaned over the seat to the nice man driving and said, look, I don't have a lot of money, but I'll give you a really big tip if you can somehow get me to the Rensen by 4 because I've got World Series tickets waiting for me there if I get there in time. And of course, he took it as a personal challenge. He said, okay, just lean back in your seat. We're going to do this. I did more than lean back. Before we were out of the airport, I was ducking down in the seat. I didn't want to see. The one time I did peek out the window, my cab driver was passing someone on the left-hand shoulder of the freeway. He got me to the Rensen at $3.50. I gave him $20, a veritable fortune to me at the time. I raced in the door, hit the up elevator button, slapped the closed door switch, and crept up and up the Renaissance Center to the floor of the Magic Baseball Suite. I had made it in time. The tickets were cheerfully handed over. On the way back down, just a few minutes later, I clutched in my hand 4 tickets to each of games 3, 4, and 5 of the 1984 World Series. I felt like I was holding $1 million and wanted to stuff the tickets in my bra. I was afraid to take them out of my hands and put them in anything so flimsy as a wallet or a purse. I ran out to the elevator, into the lobby, and straight into a phone book. Now that I had the tickets in my hand, I could call my family and friends and say, hey, if you're not doing anything this weekend, you want to go see the Tigers in the World Series? Section 105, row 10, lower box seats in lovely Tiger Stadium, Michigan and Trumbull. The Tigers won the World Series in 5 games in 1984. I was there. I was there when Gibby blasted Rich the Goose Gossage's pitch into the stands for 3 runs, rightly figuring that the Goose wouldn't be able to resist pitching to him. I was there when Aurelio Lopez, Senior Smoke, got the win and Willie Hernandez took the save. And I was there when people from the stands poured onto the field and began chopping out pieces of turf to take home. I didn't run out on the field, but those folks who did started throwing pieces up to people dancing for joy in the stands, and I got one of those. Now that's a souvenir. When I got on the plane home, I was seated way in the very back. I marched proudly down the aisle with my tiger ears still on and got applause the whole way to my seat. I wore those ears all the way home, and I wore them to work on Monday, too. I planted that piece of turf in a pot and had it for many years. The grass was from the outfield, and my sister always said it was one of the spots where Gibby spat. I've always believed that was true. Goodbye, Maine.
Hi, my name is Christopher Singleton Sr., and I am the author of Chris and Frankie, Intro to Our Ebony and Ivory Keys. When I was younger, I took piano lessons because I had access to piano lessons because my mom paid for them. But my piano instructor did not make the piano interesting. So because she did not do that, the piano wasn't accessible to me. So I wrote this book in hopes of making the piano accessible to as many students that want to learn. I say students because adults want to learn the piano too. I'm an adult and I'm still learning the piano as well as the ukulele. Hello, readers and listeners. My name is Chris. I have a unique eye condition, heterochromio iridis. My eye on your left is yellow. My eye on your right is blue. Frankie, who's sleeping in the room over there, he has heterochromio iridis too. One thing that makes me unique is on your left, my eye is yellow, while on your left, his eye is red. And I love to rest at night, while he likes to stay out of bed. Raise your hand if you love to rest at night. You know, wake up with a lot of energy. Well, Frankie, since he doesn't like to rest at night, when he wakes up, he's tired and sometimes cranky. I want to teach you something, but technically it's something you already know. Get ready to sing your ABCs. 1, 2, 3, go! A, B, C, D, E, F, G, stop! You just sing the 7 letters of the music alphabet, which is not a lot. I'm thinking of an eating utensil, and it rhymes with kicks. It originated with the Chinese culture. Chopsticks! Before we continue, we need a friend to do us a favor. Can you find the chopsticks? It will help you with Frankie's quiz later. You found the chopsticks! Great job! I knew you could do it. It's really not that hard. So, when you see the set of 2 ebony keys, aka chopsticks, look to the left of my yellow eye. You will get the letter C every single try. So we have 2 pairs of ebony keys here and 2 pairs here. So we get a C right there and a C right there. To the right of my yellow eye, this ivory piano key is the first letter in dog, which makes it a t, 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 t. Let's see, D. So we have C and a D, C and a D. To the right of my blue eye is the last letter of the word right. And what letter is it? E. That's right. Right, right. Wait, right and right, they sound the same but have different meanings. I think they're called homonyms. That's future talk. For now, just keep on reading. Okay, now you've learned that I have the letters C, D, and E. I need you to give a huge round of applause as I introduce my best friend in the whole wide world, Frankie! Frankie? But I don't want to get up. We have guests, Frankie. You've rested enough. Hi, wait, who are they? They are the nice friends I told you about, remember, yesterday? Yesterday you told me, Frankie, hurry up, I have to go to the potty. Frankie, you're not supposed to share that with anybody. Thanks for listening. Goodbye, main library.
Hi, I'm Christy Alexander Hallberg, and I'm going to be reading Chapter 1 from Searching for Jimmy Page, my new novel from Livingston Press. The night my great-grandfather died, frigid air howled through the pines and swirled down the chimney of his shack near our fallow tobacco fields in eastern North Carolina. My grandmother and I kept vigil at his bedside, a battery-operated space heater oscillating at our feet, kerosene lamps lofting shadows on the walls. He refused to install electricity and insisted the fireplace remain unlit at night. He claimed spirits talked to him through the flue at the witching hour. So did birds, especially owls. He said they were good omens, unless they flew inside your house. Owl in the house means death's coming, he'd say. I lolled my head against the walls, bare like all the others. No family portraits or prosaic artwork or thumbtacked greeting cards with snapshots of my great-grandfather's progeny tucked inside. The shack was cluttered with clothes and other debris from a fading life, but the walls were naked. He preferred it that way. No memories or illusions, except the ones that came to him at night. At the stroke of 12, he wrapped his knotty fingers around my wrist and squeezed. "Can you hear it?" he asked, his voice like winter wind crackling through kindling. An icy shiver ran through me. He had not spoken since that balmy summer night when I was 9 years old, when the river ran dry and the pines began to cry, the night my mother committed suicide, an abomination he'd called it, a sin against Providence. He'd sat expressionless in his rocking chair while Grandma delivered the news, his face bathed in candlelight, then hobbled into the woods and chanted my mother's name, like an incantation, a prayer for deliverance. Then he'd spoken no more. I inched closer to him, close enough to smell the implacable stench of the dying. "Hear what?" I asked timorously. "Owls," he said, "like music." My body fluttered, as if I were falling out of oblivion, slowly, unwittingly, the air prickly and thin. Long ago I'd heard a song about owls crying in the night, the singer's wail primeval, in sync with marauding guitar licks, that beat like jungle drums. I felt them vibrating inside me just then, like a distant echo from another life, one that still included my mother. "Can you hear the music?" he persisted, struggling to raise his head. Grandma implored me with her eyes. "I can hear it, Granddaddy." He gave a shuddering laugh. "Ain't in your head, girl." "Where then?" I waited, watching his chest rise and fall, his fitful breast grow shallow, the caesura between life and death. "It's in your soul," he finally said. He nudged his Bible beside him, giving voice to verse. Ecclesiastes 6:10, that which hath been is named already. He dropped my arm and exhaled, his face pallid and drawn. Grandma and I stood over him, bearing witness, sleep pelting the windows, that song about the owls, its searing guitar haunting me, like fragments of memory I buried with my childhood, grainy images of my mother in her yellow bedroom with her lavender incense and votive candles, her black and white photograph of a rock star standing on a stage at Kezar Stadium in 1973, dressed all in white, lips pursed, unruly dark hair framing a beatific face, guitar strapped over his shoulder, arms spread wide as if he were awaiting crucifixion. The two of them were intertwined in my mind's eye, like ashes wafting in a summer wind, waiting for water to receive them. I was born of water and moonlight, and of her, and of him. Grandma stopped the clock on the mantel to mark the moment of my great-grandfather's passing, as if halting time held power, then, forever now. She handed me a flashlight, then draped her overcoat around me, the scent of Jergens lotion and talcum powder lingering in the fabric. Go on home, honey, she said. I shouldn't have brought you here. You didn't, I said faintly. I'd followed her from our farmhouse at dusk, trudged the quarter-mile past the barn and hog pen, through the woods where the footpath ended, as if I'd heard my great-grandfather's keening call. Go home, Grandma said, prodding me toward the door. I'll be along directly. I wrenched away from her and stared at my great-grandfather, the withered shell that remained, searching for some part of him that still looked vital, the outline of his body beneath the quilt, legs splayed as if the cat he used to own were nestled between them, his arm dangling over the side of the bed. Grandma tucked in underneath the quilt her mother had made, tattered and yellowed with age, the same quilt that had covered her while she lay dying over half a century before, cancer ravaging her breast, flies swarming the window screens, attracted by the fetor of rotting flesh, all because her husband had believed he could heal her with ritual and prayer. I harbor a picture of that night in my mind's eye, my great-grandmother's bewildered stare, her mouth a perfect O, a last word half spoken, an oracle undelivered. Now he was dead, his jaw unhinged, spittle on his grizzled chin, his only child by his side, the daughter whom he only recognized after she'd tell him her name, the name he'd given her 70 years ago. Do like I say, Grandma said sternly. I stood there breathless, my great-grandfather's milky eyes, fixed and dilated, seeing nothing, seeing everything, boring into mine. Grandma cut my chin in her hand. Don't look back, she said with urgency in her voice. I never had before, not after my mother died. Like my great-grandfather, I had not spoken her name since. I had not heard her voice in a brooding summer rain, or felt her hand clasping mine in a sibylline dream, or seen her face in the shadow of a stealthy hunter's moon. I had erased her in the sainted sinner who conjured music and magic from an electric guitar, his photograph in my mother's bedroom, her unfaithful talisman. I'd never looked back. Never. Until that winter's night in February 1988, when I was 18 years old. The past summoned like fire in my great-grandfather's shack, phantom owls crying in the night. It was inevitable. Perhaps it was even Providence. Now would return me to then. The tale demanded to be told. Goodbye, Main Library.
Next month, Charlotte will say goodbye to Main Library during One for the Books, a special week of events to commemorate the legacy of Maine and to celebrate the building of a new Main Library. As a lead-up to this weeks-long event, we are challenging Charlotte Mecklenburg library users to step into the story and share what they love about libraries and read a passage from a favorite book to say farewell to Maine. These videos will be popping up all over social media as local readers challenge their friends and colleagues to do the same. I love libraries because they serve everyone, and today I'm reading from the Library of Babel in the short story collection Ficciones, written by Jorge Luis Borges and translated by Anthony Kerrigan. When it was proclaimed that the library comprised all books, the first impression was one of extravagant joy. All men felt themselves lords of a secret, intact treasure. Goodbye, Maine.
Hey, I'm Cynthia Martin, and I'm going to be reading to you from Tidal Flats. 3 years, Ethan said. That's all I'm asking. We should just wait then, Cass said, until you're done. I want to belong to you now, he said. I want us to shape our lives together. I don't want to end up 10 years from now with nothing but Afghanistan. The rock beneath her was rough, despite its smooth appearance. Running her fingers back and forth, she asked, "What are you looking for when you take your photos?" Too many things, it sometimes seems. Differing elements coming together in one moment, complications, surprising myself, color. Definitely color. The words husband and wife, she said. Those words change things. They're just words, he said. They're possessive. But I want you to possess me, he said, right this minute. He rubbed his head back against hers at the same time that he reached his hands behind him and grabbed her hips. What if I hadn't found you? What if I hadn't found you, she said. Husband and wife aren't possessive words, he said. They're belonging words. They mean we each have a place in the world where we belong. She closed her eyes. The possibility of belonging was at the same time too much and still not enough. She opened her eyes and saw houses, the shoreline, the monument, and the library guarding the town. What do you see your way, she asked. A lighthouse, the marsh, uninhabited land. His bones to her bones. She'd been alone all her life, it sometimes seemed. She knew alone. She could control it. This new country, shining off in the distance, scared her even as it drew her toward it. How about this, he said. For 3 years, I'll keep going back and forth to Afghanistan, and you'll work on imagining our family. After 3 years, no more Afghanistan. I'll limit travel to 1 night, maybe 2. And if you don't change your mind about a baby, then we won't have any. I get what I want first, but you get what you want forever. An agreement, she breathed out. The agreement felt safe. It made a space for each of them. She turned to face him, this man who understood her as no one ever had. Even she hadn't thought of planning for love. It may always be just the two of us, he said, but it will be the two of us. And this was more than she could resist. She leaned over and kissed him. He kissed the top of her head. We need a name, she said. A name? For the agreement, to make it real. It's already real, he said. But she knew the power of words. We're out here in the middle of this space that is sometimes water and sometimes sand. Is there a name for out here? Tidal Flats, he said, and looked at her. The Tidal Flats agreement, she said. And he held out his little finger, which she hooked with hers. Then he pulled her to him and kissed her, and asked her to spend the rest of her life with him. They helped each other stand and continued on. Up ahead, she was surprised to see that the rocks veered quite dramatically to the left. When they'd started out, it had looked like a straight shot. The darkness that night contained 3 things: a wife in Atlanta, a husband in Afghanistan, and an agreement that was to hold them together forever. In Atlanta, after Cass turned off her lamp, she paused. The darkness was always there, always waiting for the light to go out. When the hand of the alarm clock she and Ethan had bought together ticked to the next second, she lay down and pulled the thin spring covers over her shoulders, all the way up to her neck. Underneath the darkness was where she slept. It was where we all slept. A phone ringing in the middle of the night didn't so much break the darkness as become the sound of it. Thanks for listening. Goodbye, Main Library.